So guys, what if Naruto had hidden memories of with Harem Rias special movie? Darkness. The feeling of cold, soft isolation from the world around you. The ink that has blinded your eyes from all the majestic sights in the vast world. The dark chains that bound your body in this never-ending abyss. There were no reflections on oneself, no deep philosophical ideas were ever formed, no semblance of conscious thoughts, there was only drowning darkness. Until one tiny silver drop fell into the void, causing a set of luminous ripples to form around it, the darkness wrenched away from the divine light, fearing it, no matter how small it may be. Soon another drop came, bringing down the same effect as the one before it. The darkness jerked violently, as if it was being purged with fire. It didn't take long before those tiny drops turned into a downpour, billions upon billions of them crashing into the murky abyss, each sending off its own ripple. However, that was only the beginning of the cataclysm. Inside the very departments of the oily shadows, giant tidal waves formed, violently colliding with the darkness, forcing their way towards the light. The hollow screech could be heard as pillar of pure power blew its way to the surface, tearing through everything in its path, like bullet ripping through flesh, until it reached the other side. Until it reached the light, it was with a light grunt that signaled his awakening. Twin electric blue eyes began opening ever so slowly. The mon's face scrunched lightly in discomfort as rays of clear light assaulted his eyes. It took a moment before they adapted to it and softly flickered open. Ah, he spoke as if for the first time in eons, like one of those fabled creatures waking up after its millennia-long rest. His hands sluggishly clenched into fists before unclenching. He repeated that same motion a few more times, trying to wake his body up. His first conscious thought was that of a pink-haired girl, Sakura, explaining to him which were fastest way of waking the human body after a prolonged period of rest. The first step was wiggling one's toes, but he also remembered her saying something about his body being special. After that one stray thought, there came flood of memories answering that questions of, who was he? What was he doing here? Where was his home? He grinned. He was soldier. Ah yes, a soldier, and one of the best of them. A frown grazed the young man's face as more vivid memories entered his mind. His name was Uzumaki Naruto, Rokudame Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, and he was fighting a war, one that he was losing very badly. His adversary was a man with long raven hair and crimson eyes, the Sharingan, he noted, eyes with the power to warp the very fabric of space and time. He forcefully pushed down the horrific memories of the war into the far reaches of his mind. He couldn't allow himself to be distracted in a foreign and possibly hostile area. It took him a few moments before he could properly stand on his feet. Like the trained shinobi he was a mere moment away from opening the door, but someone beat him to it. A woman with long silvery hair which was flowing all the way down to her back, featuring a long braid on each side with small blue bows at the ends, while the rest is let down, ending in twin braids. She was wearing what Naruto could only assume was some sort of servant's outfit, but he did not let her choice of clothing fool him for a moment. The grace she held herself with gave her away the moment she stepped in, and the little bow she gave him proved his hypothesis to be true. It was silly more than anything else. Welcome back into the land of the living, she said with a small smile on her lips, but he ignored her beautiful face, which also confirmed his theory, and instead focused on her gray eyes. The eyes never lie. He recited one of his favorite quotes in his mind. Ever since he was a young boy, he had the talent to see through the windows of other people's souls, looking past the first layer, or more non-formally set the act she trying to pull on him, and directly into her true intentions. While he couldn't find anything sinister or malicious in them, he also didn't find any real kindness or hospitality either. Where am I? Naruto asked seriously, the visage of trained professional replacing that of the emotional man he was a moment ago. The woman's lips contorted into a serene smile, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. You're in safe location after your battle, Okage-sama, she said pleasantly. Not a moment later she felt a sudden pain in her abdomen. Gray managed to gaze at a cerulean sphere made out of pure energy drilling through her body. The false servant was sent flying through the air, breaking through the now revealed fake wall. Naruto immediately dashed through the now open hole, but not before muttering a quick, "It's Hokage." From the moment he left through the hole, he realized he was surrounded by at least 20 enemies and that his hospital room was only a tenth of the actual space. Some of them were marching towards the false servant while others were patiently awaiting her commands. The entire scene reminded him too much of Root for his liking. Examining the room, his blue eyes caught sight of a strange Fuinjutsu circle. It was strange because he prided himself in being the best seal master alive, but it seemed like there were more, and he couldn't even understand some of the seals. The circle, even though it looked more like a 5-pointed star more than anything else, was pulsating with power. Deciding on taking his chances with the art he knew best, Naruto dived towards it, dismantling anyone in his path either courtesy of a Rasengan or a well-placed kick. Flaring his chakra into the seals, he could feel himself being engulfed in some weird kind of chakra, akin to that of a tailed beast, but diluted into a way weaker form. The air in the room grew colder as the gray-eyed woman stood up and launched a lance made of pure ice at Naruto. He disappeared practically a second before it would have torn him apart. Her persona of a servant was gone. In its place stood the icy features of an angered aristocrat, complete with a sneer. Notify my husband at once. Reverse summoning, a technique he had employed countless times during his many bouts with the ancient Uchiha. A rather crafty and simple technique that allowed him to teleport from place to place in relatively short time. However, it wasn't really fit for battle, due to the fact that in order to work the subject needed to be perfectly still for up to 2 seconds, considering that most Chunin could slit his throat in less than 1 second proved that the reverse summoning jutsu was best used for quick, safe, non-combat transportations. The circle he had just was simple an advanced version of the said jutsu. Its improvement was that it cut down the time needed before the transportation began. He extended his index finger towards the ceiling array. Within less than a moment his finger was engulfed in a pale blue light as it smudged the ceiling array, nullifying it. Too easy. Naruto muttered quietly. The long hours of mastering the lucrative art saved his life once again. His eyes to the size of dinner plates when he examined the room. Everything from its paintings, walls and overall style was completely different from anything he had seen before. There were even some form of stone paintings of people, like mini statues, but the value and the detail of it all was impressive to say the least. What kind of a stupid noble would buy this stuff? But some things never change, he thought with a bemused look on his whiskered face after noticing the large clan crest in other end of the corridor. A crimson rose encased within a crimson circle. Why couldn't nobles be more original? At least the Uzumaki had a simple whirlpool, not something so cliché. Getting back on track, he knew he needed to find out exactly in which remote corner of the elemental nations he had awakened in, and there was only one jutsu to get the job done. A determined grin found itself on Naruto's lips as his hands did the classical cross-shaped hand seal, for the first time in what seemed like an eternity as he called out his favorite jutsu. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a silent poof 5 identical copies of the blonde appeared beside him, each and every one of them having the same determined grin as the original, sparing him only a nod of recognition before dashing in different directions, on the hunt for the strongest weapon in the world information. Rias Gremory was not having a good day. Make that a week. It has been over a week since Akino had left the Gremory mansion in order to start attending a human school in Japan. And all the 15-year-old redhead had to do all day was just practice, rest, study, practice, rest, study and so on till eternity. All she had to do in her free time was reread all the different manga she was able to buy on her last trip to the human world, and the fact that Akino was in Japan of all places only served to rub salt in the wound. Ria's family weren't helping the situation either. Searzex was busy doing duties as Lucifer. Mom and Dad were playing with Milikas. Again, as much as she hated to admit she was a bit jealous of her nephew, constantly hugging all the attention when she wanted some too. Everyone was always talking about how she is a big girl now, and how she should start taking her responsibility as the heir of the clan more seriously. Ah! She huffed in annoyance, a grimace on her face. She honestly didn't care about how they did things years ago. In fact, tradition was one of the few things she disliked the most about her family. All the way from her grandmother to her brother, everyone was constantly nagging her about all sorts of useless stuff all day, every day. Stupid grandfather, stupid grandmother, stupid mother, stupid father, stupid brother. She screamed the last part. Out of everyone she at least expected brother to be on her side, but no, he had to give her the tradition let us survive throughout the ages speech. What did they do this time? An amused voice questioned from behind her. Yelping in surprise, Rias fell from her bed and landed on her butt. She rubbed her sore bum with a distasteful frown. Whoever it was, he had picked the wrong place in the wrong time to disturb her. Rias quickly turned around with the full intent of giving the intruder a piece of her mind. Have you been taught any sort of manners? Then she saw him. 2 vibrant electric blue eyes staring at her with playful amusement. Oh, how she could get lost in those eyes. They held a sense energy and passion that would make her follow him to the ends of the world. Hair the color of gold was streaming down his head in a river of spikes. It perfectly framed his face with 2 jaw-length bangs that served to give his already messy hair a more rugged look. The rest of his body looked as if it was cut out from one of the magazines she hid under her bed. Still, more than a couple of details could be made out, and that was more than enough for her 15-year-old mind. On the topic of manners, I consider it impolite to be ignored for 2 minutes. A dark blush appeared on her oval face, as she scrambled to regain her wits. "Who are you?" she said after regaining her wits. The blonde man looked thoughtful for a moment, then a mischievous smirk appeared on his face. "Uchiha Sasuke, milady, Uchiha Sasuke." That was new, she shrugged, probably a new servant. Are you new here?" Rias asked gently, some of the noble mannerisms driven into her mind finally kicking in. "Nah. I've here for the better part of the last 10 years, the spiky-haired servant answered cheerfully. Rias raised a delicate eyebrow. "That would mean you were a child when you started." She noted suspiciously. She would have noticed if such a hunk was nearby, and on the off chance she didn't, Akino would have sniffed him out the same way a shark sniffs out blood. The fact that her brother would never exploit child labor never crossed her mind. "How come I have never seen you before?" she questioned, crossing her arms under her chest. The blonde-haired man imitated, or more like mocked, her gesture. "Dunno, maybe you just never looked," he replied coolly. Now if this was a member of any other devil clan, the servant would have been executed on the spot. No questions asked, but the Gremory family was unique in that aspect. Instead of beating their servants, they cherished them. In a recent poll from the weekly Diabolus, the Gremory servants were shown to be the happiest, followed closely by Citri servants. Only because of weather, she thought briskly, finding herself reminiscent of beautiful Citri lands, filled with lush greenery, lakes of all sizes and clear blue sky. "Are you lying to me, Sasuke-san?" she questioned. Her blue-green eyes showed nothing but absolute focus, as a bit of magical energy was building up inside her, if things go awry. The blonde broke out in a fit of laughter, stopping her dead in her tracks. Weren't people supposed to be scared when caught lying? "Ah, you've caught me," he chuckled, his laughter dying out. "What gave me away?" Rias smiled, a victorious smirk finding its way onto her lips. "I am not the heiress for nothing." His body froze in place, as if it had been struck with a freezing spell from the Leviathan. He bent down to her level, with a look of pure disbelief plastered on his whiskered face. "The heiress, you say?" Rias gave a proud nod. The servant, finally understanding his place, kneeled before his mistress, his eyes respectfully glued to the floor. And yet her heart ached. Was she really doing this? Taking out her frustrations on an innocent servant just because he had a big mouth? It was time like these that really hurt her to know that in some instances her family totally right. Maybe she was the spoiled, foolish heiress they all make her out to be. Her eyes stung, her mouth quivered, she could feel warm crystal tears going down her now puffy cheeks. Damn it. Damn it. Damn it. Why was she so weak? If her parents could see her weakness, then they'll surely just pick Malika's to be heir. Crying in front of a man who probably was not really her servant, she could feel her shoulders slumping down in defeat. Unable to stop the tears, unable to be strong, it hurt her more than 1,000 whips to the back. Then she felt a thumb on her cheek, gently brushing off her tears. She half opened her now glassy blue-green eyes to see her servant, whoever he was, smiling kindly at her. His smile was no longer that of a con man successful outwitting his victim, and more like a warm sunshine. "Come on now," he said warmly, his hand still on her cheek. "I know I am awesome, but there's no need to cry about it." That actually brought out a half-strangled chuckle out of her, until it transformed into a joyful laughter. How could anyone be so stupid, unmannerly and uneducated in the most basic forms human contact? But it was also something that surprised her, one of the few bright surprises in the last few months. Maybe today wasn't such a bad day, after all. The sweet scent of lavender was rich in the air. He hated it. It had been a couple of minutes since he had created his Shadow's clones and still none of them had reported anything of interest, so that left him here, prowling through the corridors with unmatched silence. Ero Sennin would have been proud. Then he felt the familiar sensation of a clone dispelling, its memories flinging themselves from one end of the mansion to the other. What? He thought in confusion. The memories were shown a lot of documents and yet each one of them was written in some foreign tongue that he couldn't decipher. He placed his chin on his knuckles, assuming the thoughtful position he had been known for since his sage training. From all the information he had gathered thus far, he concluded that two paths had opened up. The first of which was the safer route: collect as much money and information as possible, detonate the clones, and escape. The second was a bit more tricky. Again, collect as much money and info as possible, then go to whoever was top dog around here, kick said top dog's teeth in, get even more money and info, then leave. When he was crowned as the Rokudame Hokage under the rising sun, it was honestly the happiest moment in his life. He remembered it with picture-perfect accuracy. All the civilians chanting his name as if he was a god, all his comrades staring at him with admiration in their eyes and of course the proud smile on Granny Tsunade's face when she handed him the prized hat. The reign of the Rokudame Hokage was supposed to be that of the rebirth of a nation, of a world. Tragically it turned out to be the opposite. More blood had spilled during his reign than all the other Hokages combined. By the end of the first year as Hokage Konoha was nothing more than a crater filled with the toxic chakra of the 10 tails. By the end of his second year as Hokage only 10% of Konoha's population was still alive, barely serving the ancient Uchiha's hunts. By the end of his third year as Hokage around 50% of the world's population had been slaughtered like lambs. The butcher known as Uchiha Madara had ascended into a state of being beyond his feeble comprehension as he liked to put it. And all of that could have been avoided if Naruto had done just one thing right, just one fucking thing. If he had followed the one thing that had been drilled into his mind and heart for over 4 years. Never trust an Uchiha. He had trusted Sasuke with the responsibility of helping him stop Madara when he had first ascended, and for a while it seemed as if that was the case. They were fighting shoulder to shoulder against that force of nature with unparalleled efficiency. It seemed as if the fabled brothers had been reborn just in time to stop the great evil which was foretold by the Elder Toad. Madara had launched something akin of a Bijudama at them. It tore the earth and most of the shinobi around them, leaving not even a trace behind. Naruto had clawed out of the dirt battered and bruised, but more importantly still alive. He could feel Sasuke's presence behind him. "We need a new plan," Naruto said through ragged breaths, a piece of shrapnel firmly stuck in his lung. There was no answer. Naruto looked over his shoulder, seeing the fabled Rinnegan that Sasuke now possessed. It stared back at him with cold indifference, before he reverse summoned himself and Orochimaru to only Kami knows where. Naruto Uzumaki had been left alone to fight no survive against the howling behemoth in front of him. For 3 days and 3 nights Naruto had done his best to survive against Madara, who had in the end cornered him somewhere in Wind Country. The cold grains of sand were his only companions back then as he waited for his executor. He could feel it in the air. Dark chakra was gathering itself in front of Madara, slowly forming the bastardized Bijudama in front of him. "Rest in peace, boy," Madara spat mockingly. Naruto wasn't even conscious to see the purple sphere coming his way. When he had awoken a startling 5 days later in Mount Myoboku. "Calm down there OL Sport," an excited voice rang through the air. Turning around his eye landed on a spitting image of an Uzumaki, with long red hair, fair skin and rare eyes, something which was certainly not uncommon for Uzumaki clan considering his mother had iliac eyes, while Karen's eyes matched her hair perfectly. "And why should I?" The blonde challenged, a smirk firmly placed on his lips. "Because I fear that your body might collapse on itself," the red-haired man replied with a smirk of his own, ignoring the strong hands firmly wrapped around his neck, ready to snap it if need be. "If you could just let me go for a moment so we can talk like civilized people." Never really was much into civilized. Naruto clicked his tongue, straightening the chokehold, "But if you could tell where and who your master is I might have a change of heart." And so he led him through the large corridors of the estate towards his boss office. The man had tried to strike up a conversation multiple times, but to no avail. The shinobi knew he had kept his focus because in his mind a civilian could kill a shinobi with a well-timed rock to the skull. However, that wasn't the only reason Naruto had remained oddly quiet. There was just something about this man letting himself get manhandled like this that irked him the wrong way. "We're here." Naruto looked at the beautiful oak door in front of him. Its edges were fine and it held some of the most beautiful carving he had seen in his life, truly a work of a master carpenter. The shinobi carefully creaked the door open. Finding no one, he roughly pushed the red-haired man inside and the all-too-familiar sound of a door locking itself soon followed. "Why must you humiliate yourself?" Cirzex, the silver-haired woman from before chided, her outfit now torn from the Rasengan. Naruto frowned. There weren't many people he could name that could just walk off a Rasengan. Hell, aside from himself and possibly Sasuke there wasn't anyone alive who matched this feat. Cirzex stood up proudly and the air around him changed entirely. The man who rose to his feet carried himself with the pride and power only a cage could match. He turned to her with a sly smile on his face. "You will have to forgive me, Graphia," he explained as he calmly walked towards her and gave her a chaste kiss on the cheek. "It's not every day we get to have such an ancient guest in our home." Graphia merely huffed in annoyance as she turned back her attention to Naruto with a deep frown adorning her noble face. "I do not know what kind of beast raised you, but it did pretty poor job doing," Graphia said curtly. The shinobi's muscles tensed and a focus etched itself on his face. He had wanted to avoid a fight in order to now allow any sights of his whereabouts to reach Uchiha ears, but his heart wanted something else entirely. It craved a fight. My manners may be piss poor, Naruto admitted with a shrug of his shoulders, but I can assure you that they've taught me how to fight, he finished with a determined grin. Cold winds howled beside Graphia as spears made of pure crystal ice appeared around her. Kekkei Genkai, eh? Naruto thoughts went back years in the past during his fight with Haku, the person who unknowingly had set the path he had walked ever since. However, before any attack could be unleashed, Sirzex stood between with a stern look on his face. A look mostly directed at Graphia. Must you humiliate yourself? He recited back at her. His words rung true with her as ice disappeared into thin air, but the room had gone a few degrees colder. Sirzex gave her look, she just nodded and took a step back. Allow me to clue you in, Sirzex began, turning back all of his attention and excitement towards the shinobi. You're in the Gremory estate, but I doubt that speaks anything to you, does it? It was clear that he wasn't asking, he was merely stating the obvious. Naruto remained silent and unmoving. Look, I am sorry for that little show back there, he apologized gracefully, we just thought it would be best to break it you slowly. Break what? Naruto beckoned, clenching his fists. For the first time since their meeting, Sirzex actually looked conflicted for a moment, something he most certainly would have missed if it hadn't been for his long years as the Shinobi Alliance's lie detector. You've been asleep, Hokage, he found his voice again, a sympathetic look on his face, for the better part of at least 2 eras. His breath hitched, the feeling of being stabbed by a phantom sword in the gut prevailing over all other emotions. It all made sense now. The odd handwriting, the architecture, the weird clothes. He could feel it, the slow inkling feeling of despair going through his body, the mist of uncertainty clouding his thoughts. However, the worst part of it all was the feeling of being alone. An ear-piercing scream tore through the room from the mouth of a young brown-haired girl. Saint, stop, she said in panic, crawling away from the hostile figure behind her. Oi, wait minute there, love, the figure said with a hungry grin as he twirled a bloody dagger in his fingertips. Come on now. No need to run away. Crystal clear tears began leaking from her dough-brown eyes as she held her hands up desperately. Leave me alone, she shouted, going into hysterics. Leave me alone. She clenched her eyes shut as the man lifted her up by the throat before roughly throwing her towards one of the chairs. His hands began to wander all over her trembling body until they reached her breasts. The man tore through what was left of her dress, revealing a milky white breast. Hey Nils, the man called out, cackling all the way through, check out the tits on this one, he shouted, giving the breast a tight squeeze which in turn caused her to cry even more. Nils a bit busy right now, Naruto replied, coming out of the narrow corridor with a bloody jagged dagger in hand, and I am sure you're going to be busy too. The man known as Karl Abend was thin as bone, yet just as tough with dark hair, gray eyes and stubble of beard. He was wearing the honorary armor of the Abend clan, which wasn't much. He wore only a shirt of black oiled ring mail over boiled leather. The only thing remotely special about him was the large golden bear crest which started from his upper shoulders to his lower back. And who the fuck are you, boy? Came here to taste her own blood? Karl mocked, taking a long sip from his wine. The men around him cheered on, each of them armed with at least some sort of weapon. I assure you, most of them are low to mid-class devils. Sirzex had told him nothing someone like you can't handle. Just by looking at them, Naruto guessed Sirzex was right. He couldn't sense any sort of power within them, be it chakra or magic. They were either incredibly good at hiding it or they didn't have it. Naruto guessed it was the latter. I am here to kill you, Naruto answered truthfully. Anger flashed in his electric eyes as he saw the body of an old man, lying on the floor, his body separated from his head, the girl's father, he presumed. The men around him burst out in roars of half-drunken laughter. Karl stood up from his throne, dragging the girl with him by the hair. You know what, boy? I think I'ma educate ya since you're obviously a fucking cripple in the mind. The dark-haired man pointed at his temple, before taking long sip from goblet, drinking it for all it's worth. I am a fucking legend from where I came from. I even got me own mountain only a day's ride from here, he boasted, all the while still twirling the lone dagger in his hand. And these here are me boys, all armed to the teeth with fine steel. His boys gave resounding applause in the form of various war cries. And what does little pretty boy like thinkin' he can barge in here and ruin my celebration? Karl finished with a bloodthirsty look, his dagger now firmly in his hand, placed directly towards the girl's soft neck. It'd be best if you shut your cunt mouth, Naruto sneered, his dagger in reverse grip and ready for battle. It'll make your death less painful. Laughter echoed through the red walls of the room. Saliva and blood came out of Karl's mouth while the girl on his lap quivered in fear. Me death is gonna be painful. Did you hear boys? A storm of sudden laughter filled the bloody room. The men threw back their heads and howled until tears ran down their faces. The bravest or drunkest of them all stepped forward with a rusted short sword in hand and a grin on his face. After I cut your throat open, I'll fuck the bitch with her savior's blood on my hands. For the first time in a while, Naruto stayed silent, his eyes fixated on the man blocking his path towards the girl. No last words, the oaf charged him with a mocking look on his face. Fine then. Dai licked the jagged dagger spilled first blood. The man fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding throat in his last moments. Naruto strode past him, his feet going through the puddle of blood that was beginning to form. He also took the sword. After all, dead men don't need steel. The laughter stopped entirely. Every man in the room was clutching his weapon, their bodies tensed as Naruto strode past them, his eyes still fixated on the girl. Let her go and fight like the man you claim to be, Naruto challenged coldly. Fear flashed in Carl's face before it turned into rage as he stood up, harshly shoved the crying girl to the floor. He motioned for a weapon and was promptly handed a worn-down long sword. You're gonna beg me to cleave her head, ya little shit, Carl promised. Yay, and you'll beg me to get your decapitated head out of your ass, Naruto replied. Carl swiveled, bringing up his heavy sword. Naruto sneered in his direction. Their swords clanged together a couple of times, a test of power. Carl backed off a step. The shinobi quickly closed the newfound distance. Carl roared, trying to slash, but Naruto jerked back, just out of reach. The shinobi replied with a slash of his own, but the older man quickly parried. Shield. Carl yelled. Within less than a second he was handed a heavy-duty oaken shield, battle scars carved all over it. Naruto began circling right, away from the shield, towards the Aben's unprotected side. Carl tried in vain to hack at his legs. Naruto stalked farther to his right. The blonde was always throwing sideway glances towards the other men. He knew that they'll jump on him the first chance they got, but he was glad that they were still too fearful of his earlier display of power. Most of them were hurtling empty insults and threats his way, like a hyena showing its teeth before pouncing, but across the hall, the weeping girls stared at them fight as if there was nothing else in the world. Naruto came out from behind one of the many pillars, hard and fast, still moving right, aiming a slash at his opponent's unshielded right side. He blocked, albeit clumsily, and Naruto's blade ripped into his chest, creating a deep gash. Not so tough when you're not against old men and little girls, eh? Naruto growled, taking a moment to admire his handiwork. All of the oafs recoiled in horror at seeing their leader scream in pain, dropping his shield, and clutching his wounded chest. Naruto, however, was not done. Within a heartbeat Naruto was on him, like a fox to its wounded prey, kicking him in where his wound was graved in. Carl's body collapsed down next to the wall. Naruto heard him groan as he lifted his blade with up, before plunging it down with all of his weight behind it, directly into his opponent's already wounded chest. However, he was not given rest. Naruto's well-honed hearing caught the sound of footsteps behind him. All hell broke loose. The men who just moments ago were recoiling in fear were now charging, with all manner of weapons. War hammers, swords, spears and axes. The song of blades could be heard, resounding through the hall as one man valiantly stood up against many. One of them swung down a mace larger than himself. However, before it could reach Naruto, a sapphire sphere drilled its way through the attacker's abdomen, sending him hurtling backwards into his comrades. Another attempted to slice his head off, but instead met a dagger in the eye. When it was all over, half of the attackers were lying on the ground, dead through a variety of means. One was lucky though, piercing Naruto through the chest. The blonde gripped his chest in shock, seeing the blood trickle down his clothes. A smile spread itself onto the monk's lips while he withdrew his bloody blade, a smile not of a victor, a smile of a survivor. He watched as the body began its descent towards the floor, only to then turn to smoke. Looking around, he saw that the girl was gone, and he and his comrades were the only ones left there, until mirror images of the blonde man began entering through all the exits of the hall. He screamed. A slaughter ensued. Naruto rested his head against his hand as he placed his elbow on the glass table. He was silently looking over the girl. Anya, he reminded himself. Anya had fallen asleep a while ago. Not that he blamed her. After witnessing her father's murder and some vile bastard almost raping her, it was normal reaction on her part. There was something productive about his trip, though. He had learned more about the world he was currently staying in, found out what a middle-class devil and what a low-class devil were. It didn't take him long to understand that the world around him was still hostile. Guess even time itself couldn't even kill cruelty. Era. Akino giggled at the sight of his clothes, or to be more precise, the lack of blood on them. My little whirlpool is a tidy young man. He turned to her, a contemplative look on his face. Little whirlpool, he repeated slowly, letting the words sink in. Nope, don't like it. She giggled. Oh, I see how it is then. Naruto analyzed her, long raven hair going past her legs, tied into a neat ponytail. Violet eyes. Everyone around here seemed to have a weird eye color and a very nice figure, but it was her smile that caught his attention, a smile so small, so devilish that it put both Searsex and Graphia to shame. Jester, he chuckled awkwardly, when genius ideas like Erosenin didn't flow, they just didn't flow. Akino's devilish smile didn't waver one bit as she placed her hand proudly against her chest. I shall wear it like an honorary title. Naruto rolled his eyes. Who would have thought hell would be full of comedians, he grumbled, a sour look on his face. Foo, she laughed softly. Her laughter was a sweet knife piercing his eardrums. Life is truly full of surprises, is it not? Life is full of cunts, he corrected. That it is, she agreed. The duo descended into comfortable silence, each with a smirk dancing on their lips. A clone of his had gathered information about this woman, just like she had gathered about him as it seemed. From his clone had been told she was a Raiden specialist, like Kakashi-sensei, but she didn't have to weave together hand seals, naturally. That's good to hear, an unmistakably regal voice said from the other end of the room. Graphia strode into the room with the same noble spirit she had tried to hide, but like in everything there was a crack in her otherwise perfect mask of hospitality, the one dangerous look she gave him, to which he replied with a wink in her direction. My lord husband is expecting you, she announced, her tone indifferent, and her hand motioning towards the office. Both the gold-haired man and the coal-haired girl stood up, and with brisk pace moved towards the giant oak door. A hand clutched Akino's shoulder. Turning around she saw Graphia's foggy gray eyes. Not you, Lady Akino. Akino's reaction was expected. She smiled and quietly left the hall. I know I am going to get it later, one way or another, the blonde thought somberly. If luck truly existed in this world, then it hated him with an undying passion, like a goddamn Uchiha. When he entered the room he noted that Graphia had chosen to close the door and leave Searsex and himself alone. Naruto quirked a blonde eyebrow. On what do I owe your despicable presence? Searsex looked appalled at the question, his acting mockingly bad. What have I ever done to deserve this treatment, from a new friend no less? Naruto's eyes turned to steel, a frown grazing his lips. People died because of your pride, the blonde said harshly, pointing at the Gremory emblem on his chest, his long ashen coat fitting him perfectly, made from the finest silks in the underworld, or at least that's what Searsex had told him. Lord Freund was dead the moment those men entered his estate. Searsex defended himself. He was a good man, never one to turn away visitors. I always told him that one day one of them will have his head as trophy, but he never listened. The red-haired man smiled lightly, looking at Naruto's coat and the way it totally fitted a future member of the house. I am glad to see you didn't ruin them on your first go, he complimented. It seems sincere enough. I almost wiped my ass with them on the way back, Naruto admitted casually, shrugging his shoulders, but I thought it would be better to do it in front of you. I believe it would best if you keep it mint condition. I am sure it will grow on you. Then came the smile of a man who though he himself smarter than he actually was. Searsex was quick to understand that Naruto was not in the mood for jokes, so he wisely decided to continue to the point. How did it go? Searsex asked seriously, any sense of mirth gone from his voice, as his long fingers slid over the giant oak desk. Easier than expected. Naruto's lips parted into a deep frown. All of them were drunk, bloodthirsty fools, nothing more, he finished with a hint of disgust in his voice. Why did all the bloodthirsty drunks had to always shit on some innocent's life? That's good to hear. And what of the girl? The blonde's eyebrows furrowed in distaste. Don't ask me things you already know. Fine, no need to growl like a mongrel, Searsex responded, and what of my suggestion? No. The former Hokage's growl echoed through the room, his face scrunched up in anger. I bend my knee before no man, devil, fallen angel, and whatever the fuck's left out there. Searsex sighed in disappointment, momentarily becoming downcast at the thought of not getting a new evil piece. Out of all the greedy bastards that have ever existed, the noble one had to be the one frozen, he murmured quietly, to one in particular. Searsex had offered him 500 acres of land, a beautiful wealthy young maiden for a wife, and the tile of Lord of Dragonbone, a castle made out the bones of Grastier, the bloodmonger. However, that all came with a steep price. He would be forced to die and get resurrected to be a glorified slave to the man in front of him. He could already tell that Searsex was a proud man, judging by the look on his face, a look that obviously hadn't faded throughout the years. You do understand that you have nowhere to go. Believe it or not, the world has changed, and as you witnessed a few hours ago, Not for the better, the Gremory persisted. There was truth in his words, from one of the few geographical lessons from the academy that the years hadn't washed away. If enough time passes by, even the very continent may be destroyed, and seeing that he was in hell, there was no map to check on that. But I do have proposition for you, Naruto said with a grin, his blue eyes glinting in the light as he comfortably leaned his back against the wall. He looked pretty confident, but for the short time Sirzek had gotten to know him, he had found out that it was no good omen. I am listening. It's actually quite simple once you wrap your mind around it, the spiky-haired man said as he crossed his hands under his chest. Sirzek for his part looked annoyed at the sudden pause, but dared not interrupt. I am the best in the world at what I do. You want information? I am your guy. You need someone to deliver a boot to your enemies' asses? I am your guy. You need someone to guard your noble buddies. Still your guy. When he finished, his entire body was covered in a pale blue light that soon turned into howling winds that seemed to have a mind of their own, going in all the directions around the blonde, like he was the eye of the storm. However, that wasn't what worried him. What worried him was their cutting power. His great-grandfather's paintings was already in shreds and his beautiful dark desk was beginning to show gashes. I got your point, Sirzek said quietly. His words would have been lost in the wind in most normal cases, but nothing seemed to be normal about Naruto, so he wasn't even going to begin to try to understand how he heard him. And please avoid repeating this technique in my office, Sirzek warned. Don't worry. The former Hokage smiled, looking around the mess he birthed into existence. You can always get a painting or two, or three, or four. And what will your services cost me? The devil questioned, changing the subject, his finger intertwined in front of him. Oh, the usual. A place to crash, all the history books from the last 1,000 years or so, a lot of kunai and shuriken, steel wire, and a lot of money. With each word that came out of his mouth, the devil's face simply looked thoughtful, analyzing everything from its alpha to its omega. Not a moment too soon the Gremory stood up from his large chair. I agree to your wishes, Sirzek said, standing up and marching towards Naruto and extended his hand, but only if you proudly display the Gremory name, leave no stains of dishonor, and respect my orders. The red-haired man finished seriously, his body relaxed into mush, but his voice rang as hard as steel. Deal. Naruto exclaimed happily, shaking the devil's hand proudly. Never knew making a deal with the devil was this easy. It is grossly overhyped, Sirzek agreed, and turned around back his half-torn chair, or at least he was until a strong hand firmly grabbed him by the shoulder. Just don't go looking at me to bend a knee and call you MLORD every time you take a shit. I am no man's servant. Those were his parting words as he walked out through the giant black door and into the hallway, where his eyes met with another wannabe Uzumaki. This one, however, was staring at him with confusion in her blue-green eyes and a frown on her lips. Hey, how did you poof? Then the memories came, 5 minutes earlier. Ria's stitches were imperfect for the first time she could remember. Usually, her needlework was exquisite, better than Akino's, which was never too far off, but today it was crooked and ugly. Rias glanced at her tutor, whose face was staring like a fish out of water. The look on her face was a far cry from the usual praises she showered her with. If she wasn't your sibling, I would have gladly taken her to be my apprentice, her tutor told Brother once. Her work is just as beautiful as she is, my lord. Yet this time it wasn't. Her false servant turned friend hiding in the closet probably had something to do with it, probably. Rias kept sending sideway glances towards his direction every so often, all the while praying that Lady Muriel never went towards the closet. Your works honestly shocks me today, Lady Rias, she said somberly, her thin fingers still clutching the fabric. Are you feeling ill today? All Rias could do was chuckle awkwardly. Fear not. Your lord brother will never hear about it. Muriel whispered playfully into her ear, hiding the failure into one of her many sleeves, but only if you tell what or more likely who is the cause of this. The redhead's breath hitched in her throat. Had she found out about the intruder? Is Lord Phoenix the cause of this behavior of yours? Muriel almost cooed, almost that is. Rias released the breath she had held, before the implications of the statement were made clear, causing a crimson blush spread across her cheeks. Oh, no need to feel embarrassed, Lady Rias, the old woman said in a soothing tone, speaking from experience. It is quite normal for a maiden to feel this way before finally meeting her betrothed. Rias' eyes widened in surprise, momentarily forgetting about the blonde in her closet, her thoughts drifting to far more important matters. Tomorrow she would meet her future husband, Lord Riser Phoenix, at the annual ball hosted by his clan. He's such a gallant, Rias swooned, her eyes dreamily staring into nothing. From what she had heard, Riser was every girl's fantasy come true. He was strong. If his current record of 7-1 in the rating games meant anything, he was beautiful, he was noble, he was everything she dreamed of. she could imagine small red and blonde-haired children running around them, years from now. Now, Rias, Muriel brought her back to reality, a playful smile on her wrinkled face. You must not show Lord Phoenix anything more than grace, beauty and laugh at his jokes, no matter how bland they may be. His jokes won't be bland, Rias scoffed. She was absolutely sure Lord Phoenix was incredibly funny. Muriel's expression remained unchanged, except for the smirk appearing on her bony face. I said the same thing about Lord Benson, and we both know how that turned out, she said without a hint mirth in her voice, electing a soft giggle from Rias. Well, this ends our session for today. The old woman slowly got back to her feet, her body aching lightly from her age. Goodbye, Lady Rias, and be sure to tell me all about what happened upon your return. Not a moment after she exited the room, a deep laughter echoed through Rias' room, coming from the closet. You can come out now, Rias beckoned through narrowed her eyes. What was so funny? He came out of his position in the closet, and for a moment everything seemed normal. That was until he laughed once more, harder and louder than before. Rias quickly dashed to his position. Her blue-green eyes narrowed to slits and a scowl on her lips. She was giving him the patented know-your-place look, but to no effect. He just stood there, laughing his butt off. Rias was quickly beginning to understand that the man so not high-born. Can you at least tell me what's so funny? She said through gritted teeth, irritation clear in her voice, her fists clenched in silent fury. Naruto, he had told her that it was his real name, but she doubted it, continued to laugh a little before finally calming down, brushing off a single tear rolling of his eye. The joke is that you actually expect this Lord Phoenix to be anything more than an asshole with an ego the size of the Hokage mountain, Naruto said, still chuckling. Rias looked even more irritated than before, her cheeks flushed in outrage, not even asking exactly what was this Hokage monument. When was the last time you met a lord, huh? She challenged, the tone of her voice going up a notch. Naruto gave her a bewildered look, as if he had just been asked when was the last time he had ate sliced bread. When was the last time I met one? More like when was the last time I was free from one. He rolled his eyes in annoyance just by the mere mention of nobles. I know what they are all about, trust me. And he truthfully did. Marry my daughter, Hiashi had said a mere day after Naruto had become Hokage. Frankly, most nobles disgusted him, and he made that clear to Rias. She rolled her eyes at his retort, and have you ever truly known any nobles? She argued once more. He gave her an incredulous look. Have I known any? One of them used to be my best friend. His face darkened slightly for a moment, but he continued, and he had a 5-foot-tall stick up his ass. Rias was about to reply before something incredibly odd happened. As Naruto was standing there, annoyed and grumpy, he disappeared into a puff of smoke. She glanced furtively around the room, finding nothing. What? Brother must hear of this, the heiress thought as she stormed out of the room. How did you poof? She repeated, her frown deepening, and how did you change your clothes this fast? Naruto stood in silence, digesting the memories of his clone, damn big mouth, he thought bitterly. A parlor trick? Naruto laughed awkwardly, but he was dreading something far worse. He just pissed off Sirzex, he was so getting guard duty, and he was almost sure this was the girl he was supposed to guard. May the Shinigami have his back on this one. They had been traveling for over 2 days, first via the strange that weird Fuinjutsu circle for what Sirzex had told him was most of the way. If this was the remainder, Naruto didn't want to know what full road was. Mountains, rocks, trees, and black soil were the only things that stood before his eyes for who knows how many miles ahead and who knows how many miles behind them. At first he was excited at the prospect of seeing the tallest mountain in the underworld, if nothing else so he can piss of the edge of it and make a dick joke. However, time could truly curb everybody's enthusiasm. After a full day of being stuck in a carriage, an admittingly good carriage, but a carriage nonetheless, he could say that his legs were feeling numb. He didn't remember the last time he was forced to be seated for such a torturous period of time. Hell, those lame council meeting took mostly around 5 hours. The company hadn't been the best either. The guards seemed stupid enough to get picked off by a newly minted Junin, and they were piss poor at keeping their mouths shut, at least before the incident happened. After that they were as gullible as kittens, Naruto thought, smirking. At least the heiress wasn't as bad as he thought she'd be. He had expected a whiny girl with too much power in her mouth rather than on her fists. He was proven incorrect. She wasn't arrogant or snotty to upset his nerves, and she did have a singer's voice, and she sure wasn't hard on the eyes. Anything but actually. With long crimson hair flowing down her shoulders and those unique blue-green eyes, she sure was a catch. He could imagine himself, if he was still a genin, being head over heels for her. Alas, that was not the case. So you're telling me that these people live on top of the biggest mountain in the world? Naruto said, still finding it hard to believe, even with ceiling circles and everything. Living so high was surely a pain. It is their ancestral home, after all, Rias explained, taking a sip from her tea. It was scented with flowers and mixed with fruits to create a truly marvelous taste, if her expression was anything to go by. Naruto was about to reply hastily until he actually decided to give it some thought. If he was still in the elemental nations and the war was over, would he want to settle down in Uzunokuni? His own ancestors' home, protected by powerful ceiling arrays and the everlasting torrents of water. There was truth in her words. He could feel it in his chest, a certain longing, threatening to burst out of his chest, at the thought of stepping into his mother's old home. The Phoenix guys lived on top of a mountain, right? They were bound to have some maps. Are you okay? Rias said warmly. He looked up, only to meet her worried gaze. How long had he been lost in thought? Guess it really was uncharacteristic of him to be quiet for a prolonged period. Yay. I was just thinking about home, the blonde said with a cheerful smile. No use bringing down the mood just because one fool thought a place that had been most likely been buried underneath who knows what. Where did you grow up? I can only imagine it was somewhere south considering your looks. Rias looked at him, waiting for a confirmation on her hypothesis. South, she wasn't that far off the point. Hai no Kuni was the second warmest of the great countries, behind only Kei's no Kuni. You can say that, he confirmed. I even got the lucky side of the building. The sun always shone when I got up from bed and it always set when I went to sleep. It must have been beautiful, Rias declared with a smile of her own. Sadly, no, Naruto chuckled. Oh boy, would have Sakura-chan hit him hard if he ever thought about bringing her to his apartment. He could clearly remember what a mess it was. Clothes everywhere, a dozen dishes in the sink waiting to be washed for weeks. But it did hold a special place in his heart, always had, always will. It sucked big time, but at least it was close to the academy, so when I woke up late I could still come to class. He snickered. Now those were the days. How did you do in school? She gave him a quizzical look as she leaned in, blue-green eyes staring at him with interest. If brother chose you to my personal guard, you must have a great deal of talent. Naruto blinked a couple of times. Can't say that I was all that good those days, he chuckled, scratching the back of his head sheepishly. Oh, and how good were you exactly? Rias asked, leaning in even more until their bodies were almost touching. Naruto could feel her soft body almost resting against his chest, her soft ruby lips being at the level of his chin. The worst part about it was the way she held that innocent expression, like she wasn't even noticing the situation they were in. I was, the Dobie, he admitted, his blue orbs forcefully glued to her own orbs. He couldn't get caught staring at her breasts on his first day. Damn it. He was a professional. A real one, not like Ero Sennin. You were the Dobie? Rias raised an eyebrow. She knew he was an orphan. Brother had told her that much, but he just wasn't fitting into the deadbeat category she had imagined. How were you the dead last? You seem strong and smart. I just don't get it. Was the rest your class full of monsters, or something? It's simple, actually, Naruto said evenly. The day he became ashamed of himself was the day he would stop being awesome, and that was not happening. Combine my natural stupidity with a touch of butting heads with every single authority figure, and there you have it. The Dobie. Didn't you study at all? She asked, her voice unbelieving. Rias didn't even plan on asking about the second part of his statement. Naruto looked thoughtful. Then he shrugged his shoulders casually. Nah, I was too busy pulling pranks, he admitted without a shred of shame in his voice. He learned a lot more about stealth by pulling pranks rather than staying in a boring classroom with a dozen other people and a teacher that was as dull as they come. It reminds me of one of my favorites. The spiky-haired man exclaimed cheerfully, overly cheerfully. On my graduation day I knew I had to leave a message. Why no? Something people will remember for years to come. His blue eyes shone with unholy glee as he spoke. So I climbed up the tallest monument in the village, and I drew graffiti all over the stone faces. Rias laughed out loud, clutching her stomach as she did so. She didn't find his tale all that funny, but the way a man like him can get so hyped over such a juvenile deed, it more than deserved the laugh it got from her. I can't believe you can get so worked up over a childish prank, she said in between giggles, her hand gently placed over her lips. Hey, Naruto argued. There was no hint of steel in his voice, he just liked playing around. I'll have you know that it took a great deal of planning and bravery to pull it off. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest, looking out through the window into the pale night, the stars illuminating the sky like tiny little specks of holiness, ironic considering their current whereabouts. I am sure it did, Rias spoke, mirth evident in her voice, too much mirth if you asked him, as she patted him on head. her soft hand gently brushing over his golden locks, and Naruto didn't want to admit it but, it felt damn good. He closed his eyes, mulling over his next words. I need to go for a walk, Naruto said nervously, kicking the carriage door open. He was a moment away from jumping before he felt a pair of graceful arms slid across his shoulders, wrapping themselves around his neck. "Oh, no you don't," she exclaimed, inserting her long legs around Naruto's arms, tying them around his gut. "You're not getting away that easily." Naruto didn't know what to do. It was the first a client had actually straddled him like a horse. So he did the only thing that made sense at the time, he jumped. "What are you doing?" Rias shouted in panic as Naruto mimicked a cat, bouncing right off the road. "Stop." "Hey. Sorry it's too late for that," Naruto said coolly, picking up speed, and leaving nothing a trail of dust behind him. He could barely register what the other guards were yelling about. He honestly didn't care. "Am I going too fast for you?" "Yes," she yelled back, clutching onto him for dear life. "Good." Rias' blue-green eyes shone with panic as she stared at his feet. Cones of wind were subtly forming around his ankles, tearing through the road like an anvil through dirt. Then he lunged through the sky like an arrow. Rias screamed, burying her face in his hair, tears streaming down her eyes. She could feel the cold night breeze storming through her hair. The exhilarating feeling of the speed coupled with the beautiful sky was going to be etched in her mind until her final moments. Naruto looked up towards Rias, a grin on his face. Rias' hair contrasted the night sky so starkly that it seemed to be ablaze, like a shooting star, his mouth agape. Naruto couldn't find it within himself to say a word. Her beauty was so ethereal, so dare he say it, divine? Maybe guard duty wasn't as bad as he thought it. "Good evening, Lady Rias. We thank you for coming," Brandwood told her as their horses climbed to pass. "I am very glad you made it here safely." "You don't need to worry about us," Rias said with a gentle smile. Sometimes she felt incredibly annoyed at the fact that every guard in the underworld doubted her safety. She always had at least 5 strong and brave guards around her. Not including Naruto, who seemed to be on a whole different level. Add to that her own growing skills with the power of destruction. She felt as if she was safest girl in the world. "We only met a couple of dragons on our way. Nothing serious," she joked. Truth be told, she started out with 6 guards, but one of them got into a squabble with Naruto about his attempt to abduct Lady Rias. One moment he was on his feet, a fire spell in one arm and a sword in the other. Next moment he was face first against the molten road, unconscious. It did go to show just how strong Naruto was, at least in her eyes. The unlucky man was sent off back to the Gremory mansion for treatment. "Did you encounter any Rouge Devils on your way here?" Brand asked. He was a bulky young man, around his early 20s with a long face, small nose and short brown hair. "No. I can't say we have," Rias replied calmly, but there was a jolt of worry going up her body. The rogue clans were normally prowling through the larger roads of both the underworld and the human world. That's where all the stories of evil devils began. If only Lord Ruvel had enough time to come and exterminate those vermin. He looked at her anxiously, suddenly remembering who he was speaking to. "I am sorry for troubling you with my empty banter, my lady." "No need to be sorry for speaking your mind," Rias said calmly, beckoning for Naruto and her guards to come closer. "I can bring up the issue at tonight's ball, if you think it will help the situation." "Thank you, my lady." And so the long climb had begun. She arched an eyebrow when she saw the battlements ahead, the parapets built into the very mountain itself. The pass was so narrow that no more than 6 men could move through it at one time. Twin towers showed themselves along the rocky slopes, the only thing joining them being a small bridge made out of old stone. Many men were silently staring at them through the narrow slits of the towers. Naruto, however, was anything but impressed with the sight before them. He was sitting half asleep on his horse, not even mentioning anything about the rogue devils. Last night her brother had told her that Naruto wasn't from around here. When she had asked where he was from, brother only smiled and told her to ask him herself. When she did, he only sent a smirk her way and said, "Konohagakure no Sado," before dozing off again. If it wasn't for the beautiful sight in front of her she would have frowned. If he didn't want to tell her, at least he would have been honest about it. "How long a ride?" she asked. "I am guessing that we will arrive in a few more hours at most," Brand answered dutifully. "Can't we just fly?" Rias whined. She hadn't flied since last week. Her wings were aching from underage. "The winds are simply too strong. They will blow us right off the mountain." "They don't seem so strong right now," Rias argued, looking over the giant mountain. "The winds are fickle, my lady. There is no telling when they will pick up," Brand warned. He was a cautious man. Rias frowned, but said nothing more. It was better for her wings to ache rather than her body to become a bloody spot on the ground. They walked in silence for the next hour or so. The sun was already beginning to set, casting a bronze light all over them. The redhead was forced to shield her eyes. The sun was so much stronger up here compared to back home. Their path had become narrower, but also finer. Alongside every corner stood a statue of some of the greatest members of the Phoenix clan. It is said that Michael himself had to come down in order to destroy the mountain, and he would have if not for the timely intervention of the Satans. Ria's face looked divided for a moment as she mulled over whether to ask Brand about Lord Riser. The crimson-haired beauty knew she was bound to meet him tonight, but she couldn't contain her excitement. Aside from his feats in the raiding games and beauty, there was nothing more of him that she knew. That was an unnerving fact considering their future marriage. Perhaps it was just fear before the meeting, but she felt a small sliver of doubt. What if he wasn't the gallant she thought he was? Finally deciding to speak, she craned her neck towards Brand, a regal look on her beautiful face. Can you tell me something about Lord Riser? I have had very little of him beside his undeniably skill in the raiding games. Brand looked conflicted for a moment, his face scrunched up in thought. Well, he began with uncertainty clear in his voice, Lord Riser is famous for his pride. Rias rolled her eyes in light annoyance. All lords are proud, she thought in distaste. It was one of the few static things in life. What about Lady Ravel? I heard she was a beautiful young girl. Rias didn't press any more about Riser, but she thought that some information could be gained about him by finding out what his siblings were like. A warm smile appeared on the guard's face. Ah, Lady Raves is truly a great girl, she both her parents' looks and wits. That's good to hear, Rias said with a gentle smile of her own. For some reason being reminded of herself when she was around that age, before all the responsibilities were being dumped on her. She most certainly didn't expect the young Mons to darken a moment later. If only those greedy old dogs had decided to wait a few more years. Greedy old dogs? Rias parroted, interested in the current's dilemma. Suitors, Lady Rias, Brand said curtly, disgust evident in voice. What kind of a sick freak would fancy a little girl? Rias thought in both disgust and anger. She sure was lucky that for most of her childhood was spent under her brother's watchful eyes. I've had enough of this. Naruto screamed from behind them, throwing his hands up in exasperation. Patience clearly wasn't his strong suit. But what he did next shocked everyone present. He suddenly stood up from his black stallion, and began running up the mountain, literally. Rias wasn't even going to try and chase him, she knew better. You can at least act like you're enjoying yourself, Rias chided, her voice faint as a whisper. Naruto merely bristled at her comment, opting to fix his burnt orange tie. Thankfully, he at least knew he had to look good, and look good he did, with a coal-black suit, which contrasted with his silver shirt. The only thing sticking out was that pesky orange tie. But no matter what she said, nothing was able to convince her blonde guard to change it. However, even with the tie he looked stunning. His messy golden locks appeared to be tamed, even if a little. I am not a liar, he countered, his mint-fresh breath washing over her. Good thing she forced him to brush his teeth 5 minutes before entering the hall. As much as Rias liked his ramen-flavored breath, she was a realist. Odds are the lords and ladies of all the greatest clans in the underworld won't like it. Allow me to put the finishing touch, the crimson-haired beauty suggested, and he nodded solemnly. She took out a single rose, its crimson petals almost glowing due to being showered with a false luminescence as she neatly placed it into the opening of his suit. See, you look dashing. A smile graced her beautiful face. Naruto only grumbled. When they reached the gates to the hall, Rias could only admire the beauty of gates themselves. Each of them were gigantic, made of wood. Its branches were littered with all manners of precious stones. Rubies, emeralds, sapphires, it had it all. A tall and lean butler opened the gates, his eyes respectfully glued to the floor, but even the floor was beautiful to look at. When they entered the great hall of the Phoenixes, she breathed in sharply, having trouble taking it all in. Soft music was caressing her eardrums from a live band. When one of the many waitresses strode past her, she noted that woman was carrying a boiled egg, enclosed in golden leaves. It looked positively delicious. When she finally got her bearings back and began walking through the hall, admiring all the beautiful painting adorning the walls, all the different noble men and women were conversing around her, each with their own tale to tell. She felt a familiar presence coming her way. Turning around, she smiled. It's good to see you are here, Rias. Sona's words came out as they normally did. Cold, it was quite funny that she was wearing a passionate red gown, and I am glad that you have dressed appropriately for the evening. Rias smirked at her comment. She was wearing a strapless violet dress that hugged to her body and showed off her impressive curves, but did not reveal too much skin. She was a lady, after all. Thanks you. Rias took the compliment with a small smile dancing across her lips. You look nice too, Sona. Sona took the compliment with the same icy demeanor as before, giving away only a nod of her head, her pearls shining when the rays of light hit them. I plan on calling the rest of our little group in due time. Little group? Rias beckoned, a thoughtful look on her face. Sona Citri, Rias Gremory, Cyroorg Biel, Sikvera Agaras, Sona droned out with brisk pace, her visage unchanged. We are the cream of the crop. Big things are expected of us. Some of the veterans have even names as the four young kings. The slim young woman explained, her violet eyes calculative. Rias, have I ever told you about the title me and my friends got when we graduated? Naruto said suddenly, looking directly at Rias, his loud and obnoxious voice echoing through the hall, and quite a few of the various lords and ladies shot him a dirty look, but he didn't seem to mind at all. Rias, teach your serve. Sona never got the chance to finish her sentence as the blonde continued. So don't let it get to you. These old geezers just jump at the possibility of playing poets, Naruto explained, beaming as he did so. While he imparted his wisdom, Sona's eyebrow was twitching dangerously. Naruto looked away from her and glared at Sona as if she just broke some taboo. Can't you see that we are trying to have a conversation here? He snapped at the Citri. Her frown only deepened upon hearing his words. You are a classic example of the inverse ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. Rias, Naruto tilted his head, looking genuinely confused. Is your weird friend hitting on me? Rias took an audible gulp. She had to defuse the situation before her friend drowned. Naruto, can you please excuse us for a moment, Naruto? She said calmly. It was the first time in her life that one of her people had acted so weird. Sure, he replied cheerfully, his eyes going towards the bar. Do you want something to drink? No. Like a kid in a candy store, Naruto dashed towards the bar. This was going to be a long night. Sake, please, Naruto said with a smile etched on his face. There was nothing like drinking some good ol sake to keep your mind of the bloodthirsty sharks around you. Nothing at all. I am very sorry to inform you, sir, but we do not have sake, the barman said, his long face scrunched up into an awkward smile and his numerous locks of blonde hair fell across his head. What? Naruto said silently, a dangerous look on his whiskered face, his fingers jerking through the bar. But we do have whiskey. The barman quickly interjected, his voice full of worry and fear. It was kind of funny, actually. Fine, fill a cup of this whiskey, and so he did. He took the best-looking bottle from the highest shelf. Sweating as he did so, the blonde-haired barman took a large, round cup with the phoenix sigil on it, and placed in front of the Uzumaki. Naruto's eyes were solely focused on the bronze liquid that was flowing down the bottle. His blue eyes scanned the bottle and found the title The Forgotten Angel. It looked to be of fine quality, but he wasn't certain. Naruto lifted the cup cautiously, his eyes staring at the foul, chestnut-colored liquid as if it was some kind of enemy. He carefully moved the cup towards his lips, uncertain on whether or not he should even drink it at all, until he finally drank it. Ever so slowly, he could feel it going down his throat. It had an irresistible and seamless blend of different flavors. Naruto carefully placed the now empty cup down, and looked at the barman whose entire face screamed of fear. Another. He yelled for all to hear, proudly shoving the cup in his fellow blonde's chest. After that he couldn't even remember just how much he had drank. All he could remember were the words Forgotten Angel and another. The world around him seemed to lose focus as he sluggishly moved his limbs in a vain attempt to walk towards Rias, who was chatting with the annoying girl from earlier and some guy. Do you need any help, sir? A feminine voice called out from behind him. He slowly turned around, his unfocused blue eyes meeting a pair of orange eyes. He liked orange. Yay, he slurred as he felt himself getting lifted from the floor, and before he knew what happened the woman was dragging him towards the balcony. However, he was having far too much fun in staring at her cleavage to worry about such bothersome things. A single stray raven lock fell into his face, before it was gently pushed away. Here, the raven-haired woman said as she leaned him against the stone railing. He could barely keep himself on his feet, but he managed. What's your name, handsome? The woman whispered huskily into his ear, her soft hands going through his chest. Before pulling out the crimson rose, Rias Rose, he reminded himself. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto raised an eyebrow. The woman sure was beginning to act strange. Her orange eyes went visceral as she shoved. He could feel himself slipping from the railing, and suddenly he was falling. Naruto shot out a hand, gripping the ledge with everything he had in him. He swung against the building, crashing into it, stealing the breath right out of his lungs. He saw the woman's visage, emotionless. She said something, but the sound of the wind was deafening. A gleaming blade appeared in her hand as she ran it through his hand. Yelling, Naruto went backward out of the balcony and into the emptiness of the night. Revel Phoenix, only daughter of Lord Phoenix and sister of Riser Phoenix, was currently standing in front of two older men, much older men. Or gold miners as Rias liked to call them. One of them was Lord Brimley, of the small Brimley clan which was directly under the control of the Phoenix clan. He was the oldest of the trio, with his hair the color of ash and a small beard to match. He was head of his house for at least the last 200 years. He was being unusually quiet, only drinking his wine and laughing when Revel laughed, a true sleazebag. The other man was much younger than him. He seemed to be in his early 20s, with curly dark chestnut brown hair, and dancing black eyes. He was the man making Revel laugh, and seemed to be the better suitor. But there were whispers about him being a lousy fighter. It honestly wouldn't surprise Rias all that much, though. He fit the part. Ah, that reminds me of my battle against an entire squadron of fallen angels. The younger man had a smirk on his face, which caused Rias to frown. She would end this disgusting attempt at thievery. I was alone without my peerage. They had cornered me, and pounced like the animals they were. The situation seemed hopeless, but I came up with a brilliant idea. I am sorry to interrupt, Rias interjected, gracefully stepping between the blonde girl and the men, but I wish to have a few words with Lady Revel. For the first time in an hour Lord Brimley took his mouth off the glass of wine, a couple of drops falling into his grey beard. Now, I am sorry Lady Gremory, but we are in the middle of a very important conversation, he slurred, a drunk frown on his lips. Leave us, Revel said coldly. But Lady Phoenix, leave us, Revel said, steel flashing through her voice. The older man seemed freeze dead in his tracks, and with a sigh he began moving away from them, but not before sending one last dirty glare Rias' way, to which she replied with a wink. Revel glared at the younger noble, still standing in front of her with the same cockiness as before. Do you need a special invitation? Revel sneered coldly, crossing her arms under her chest. The man only seemed to beam at her words. Can I at least finish my story, Lady Revel? No, alas, I shall have to finish it some other time. Without any further fuss, he turned around and left the two alone. The first one to react was Revel, bursting out in laughter, followed by Rias. You are not serious about wedding old Brimley, are you? Rias questioned, not able to hold her curiosity. Of course not, Raves said as if she was speaking about the afternoon weather. I just didn't want to make him crawl back to his castle now, because he will annoy my father later on. Men never learn, do they? Rias giggled, taking a sip from her wine. There are no such things as men, there are only boys who got bigger, Revel quipped, still laughing. Clever words from a clever girl, Rias chirped. Thank you, Revel answered with a grin. Is it bad that I think that they're all losers? The redhead placed a hand around the younger girl's back as she spoke. Not in the slightest, no one should ever be ashamed of the truth. The duo descended into laughter once more, electing whispers from the nearby lords and ladies. But none of them dared to speak too loud. No one in all the realms was stupid enough to badmouth the Gremory heir, and a phoenix, especially not devils. Sometimes being noble has its perks. Rias, though happily, she didn't know why, but unwillingly her thoughts drifted towards her blonde enigma of a guard. Blue-green eyes scanned the room, first focusing towards the bar, before widening in surprise. That was odd, he seemed quite jolly at the prospect of drinking. What are you thinking about? Revel asked, pushing herself nearer to the Gremory. Rias turned her body back to the younger girl, a strangely embarrassed smile on her lips. I was just looking for my own loser, Rias answered truthfully. Her smile seemed contagious because the blonde smile as well. All men are like that, they are all smooth and strong in the begging, but when it's time to dance they all seem far too sickly, the Phoenix said confidently. Rias covered her mouth in surprise. It was incredibly surreal to hear a little girl, no older than 13, speak like that. Aren't you a bit young to have so much experience on the topic? Rias questioned gently, uncomfortable with the subject. Revel, however, seemed anything but uncomfortable as she waved off her concerns. Don't worry, I am almost a woman now, I know a thing or two. Before this surreal conversation could continue any longer, Revel was called by her father to meet another group of suitors. Rias had to hold back a frown. Was this how non-heir children were treated? Malika's didn't seem to live the same kind of life as the blonde girl, but he was admittingly a year younger than her, but that thought continued to unnerve her. With a worried look on her face, Rias marched toward Sona's direction, curious to see if she had found the rest of the 4 young kings. Found them, she had. They were even enjoying themselves in a pleasant conversation, which she quickly joined. The music was like fine wine to her ears, soft, yet memorable. The rest of the so-called 4 young kings had come from their respective clans to attend the ball. First her cousin, Sireorg Bael, marched in, and greeted them all with warm smiles and kisses. He was the quintessential noble in all aspects. He was talented, he was strong, he was smart, he was charming. In Rias' humble opinion, he was going to be a great leader to the Bael clan, and the clan was in dire need to have strong head right now. With all due respects to her uncle, the current head of the clan, he was very anti-social, weak-willed man. She had heard brother talk about him being the death of the once great clan, but it seemed the future was in good hands. She had a feeling that a blossoming friendship will overcome Sireorg when he met her blonde guard. Then came a woman who was literally made out of ice, with long blonde hair and sharp blue eyes, matching her gown perfectly. Sikvera strode in with the look of a competitor on her face. She kind of reminded Rias of Sona, but she didn't say a word. Her only hope was that Sikvera wouldn't ruin the night. And then I locked him into a hold. He squirmed in pain. I am telling, I honestly mistook him for a swine at one point, but even he didn't last too long. About a minute or so until he tapped out. Sireorg puffed his chest out in pride, electing a giggle from Rias. His stories were not even a bit funny, but she humored him. It was common courtesy. After all, he did put up a good fight though. I believe you could have finished him the moment you threw him on the ground, Sona said as she positioned her pearls around her neck. It would have saved you a lot of energy. I guess you do have a point, Sireorg acknowledged with a smile. I was just too into the moment to think about it. That could cost you a game, Sona said bluntly. Before the Bael heir could say a word, Rias quickly interjected with a smile. Can we not talk about battles before they have even happened? Sona merely huffed in annoyance, looking away, but what worried Rias was the stare Sikvera was giving her. Cold and calculative, her eyes holding a small amount of contempt behind them. It honestly worried her. You are right, Rias Gremory, it is foolish to talk about battles that have yet to happen, Sikvera drawled out, her voice holding no semblance of irrationality. But do tell me one thing, is your peerage even complete yet? She said, straightening her glasses. Rias buckled at her words. She truly hadn't finished her peerage yet. She was still missing one knight, which greatly crippled her team's flexibility. A second rook to all the heavy-duty stuff. Her heart stiffened every time she saw Kaneko getting hurt. Even if it did no real damage, it was still painful to look at. And she lacked 2 bishops. Well, in theory she had 1 bishop, but he was currently unusable, along with any sort of pawns at her disposal, making it extremely hard to overwhelm an enemy without the pure straight of numbers the pawns had. Not yet, but I am getting there. Rias tried to brush off that mean comment with a smile. There was no point in letting everyone see her weakness. Oh, really? The Sikvera acknowledged, a false frown dancing on her lips. If that's so, then I have one question. Why are you even here, girl? Rias' breath hitched in her throat. Well, I am her, where words never got leave her mouth as they were brushed off. I am not asking you why you're here, in this room. That's obvious to anyone with half a brain cell. The platinum blonde began, taking a sip from her ruby red wine. She seemed to be enjoying it, if the smirk on her lips was any indication. That or she just enjoyed tormenting the redhead. I am asking why you're here with us. When everyone in our little group has a complete set of pieces, all except for you, since I know I won't get a proper reply out of you, I'll just say it out loud, so people can hear us, Sikvera sneered, her hands tightening around the narrow golden goblet. You're here because you're the Lucifer's daughter, parading around with less than half a peerage, thinking you're something when you're not. Pathetic actually. Her words cut through Rias like a blade through soft flesh. No words came out of her mouth. She looked around her companions, needing any kind of help. Her eyes first landed on Siror, who only looked down, silently agreeing Sikvera's words. Then she looked at one of her oldest friends for support, but all Sona answered with was a curt nod. Cat got your tongue. The woman mocked. Rias could feel her lower lip quivering, and her eyes watering ever so slightly, but no tears rolled down her cheeks, no. Instead she felt a spray warm liquid hit them full force. Her eyes opened slightly, before widening in horror. There was blood on her cheeks. Her hand went towards the crimson life liquid, lightly brushing against it, inadvertently dirtying the flesh. She looked down at her fingers as if examining the blood, the way it flowed through her fingers like the warm water from the shower. Looking up, she saw her cousin, with a knife sticking right off his throat, a look of pure anguish and shock in his face, which only grew colder by the second, before his entire body hit the floor with a silent thud. Everyone around her held the same horrified expression as she did. Someone screamed, everyone rioted. Even in his drunken daze, Naruto felt the wind rush through his golden hair, the chilling winds colliding with his skin. He could feel himself plummeting through the air, like a wounded bird. The way his heart was beating with such intensity that it seemed like it was going to burst right out of his chest. The adrenaline pumping into his body seemed to clear his mind. Normally, it wouldn't do much help, but like Sakura-chan had said, thanks to Kurama his body was made for survival. On instinct he had begun going over the hand seals for the Kachiyose no Jutsu, his bleeding hand substituting for the usual bite. Luckily, the bitch hadn't severed any joints. Boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. Naruto recited the seals as he pushed his hand in front of his body. Nothing, not even a tadpole appeared. His eyes widened in shock and fear. He was begging to see the ground, when he passed through another cloud. Desperately he weaved the hand seals again. The result was the same. Naruto wasn't stupid enough to believe that he will survive the fall. Even his body won't be able to live through that. Was this how he was going to die? Having awoken from an age-long slumber just to die from some random assassin? No. He roared defiantly, weaving the hand seals once more. He wasn't going to die like that. Kachiyose no Jutsu. A small puff of smoke appeared. When it dissipated, it revealed a small orange toad, clad in dark robes. Its small eyes widened in surprise at seeing the blonde, but it didn't have the chance to say anything as it too began its descent towards the ground. Its small hand latched onto Naruto's shoulder as it performed the stone tongue technique, latching onto a nearby ledge, pulling the shinobi with it. Naruto could see the mountain becoming closer and closer, until it was only a few feet away. Immediately, he administered chakra to his feet, latching onto the mountain while the toad climbed onto his shoulder. He examined the small toad, finding it vaguely familiar. Naruto knew of only one orange toad and his name was Gamakichi? Naruto asked, his mouth agape. Gamakichi said, his face the same as the shinobi's. Naruto? Naruto beamed, a large smile on his face. Is there anyone else as awesome as me? The toad's eyes went as wide as dinner plates, shock and confusion first appearing on its small face, then came realization, and began streaming down its face. Where the hell have you been, Naruto? He yelled, his voice old and scratchy. Sleeping, old friend, Naruto replied wistfully, beginning the climb back to the estate. The wave of solid air seemed to almost tip him over, but he pulled through. But we can talk later, right now I need your help, like old times. Gamakichi seemed to want to protest, but looked around them and only nodded. I swear, if you take a nap like this one again I will personally force feed you moss stew, Gamakichi threatened, which only elected a smile from Naruto. Don't worry, I drank my coffee this time, Naruto joked. Blocking another wave crushing air, Naruto closed his eyes, ignoring the howling winds around him, instead of fighting against them. He synchronized with them, became one with them. He gathered the chakra around him. Gathered nature's chakra, which was an unending ocean around him, out of which he could only gather a few stray drops. The drops entered his chakra system gently, inspiring a peaceful feeling all over his body. He felt one with nature, one with the world. His serene visage greatly contrasted with the chaotic world around him. Until his eyes fluttered open, golden with bar-like pupils, squinting under the harsh winds. His mastery over sage mode was higher than any living being in the world. Jiraiya, who was renowned for this technique, had not truly mastered it. Whenever he had used it, his body would shift into something which was not entirely human. When Naruto used sage mode, only his eyes changed and a reddish pigment appeared around them. The telltale signs of a true sage. With Gamakichi had already back to his home, he lunged from his position, like a bullet, his power so vast that the rocky landscape ruptured behind him. It was almost as if he was flying. His feet met the mountain again a few moments later, but this time he was at least 50 feet from his original position. With a frown, he repeated the motion, becoming airborne once more. The woman, whoever she was undoubtedly an assassin, and assassins rarely just hung around parties, drinking and dancing. No, they were up to something. The question was what, or more likely who. Looking back, he knew that this was every assassin's wet dream. A lot of rich, high-priority targets in one place, but what really irked him was the woman's face. She had somehow known about him. Did reputation fly so fast these days? Searzex assured him that no one knew of his existence, aside from a few choice people from Gremory clan and his fellow Satans. Did her employer know of him, or was she lucky enough to get that info off someone? His frown deepened. As much as he wanted sweet payback, he had to bring her in alive, and extract the needed information. The light from the mansion burned brightly amidst the clouds, and with one final push he shot himself towards the very same balcony he was shoved of. He inspected the grey stone. The only evidence left of what had transpired was the blood from his hand. She had taken the knife. He rapidly clenched and unclenched his fist, testing to see if his hand was back into top shape. Opening the doors, he golden eyes witnessed a most unusual sight. Everyone was staring into someone, their mouth agape with shock, and their eyes filled with terror. Someone screamed, and the magical pressure in the room went through the roof. Every single devil in the room was beginning some sort of spell, their eyes narrowed and suspicious towards the very same person they had been speaking to not a moment earlier. Yet, there was one scream that was tore into his heart louder than any other. It came from the very center of the hall. Rias. Naruto thought in distress, launching himself from the balcony. Within a second he was already at her side, expecting everything. Had the assassin targeted her? Was she injured? Was it critical? His mind was going a mile a second, and when his golden eyes finally found her, the sage felt like someone had just struck him with a giant war hammer. Rias was going into panic mode, her face dirtied with the blood, and a dead body was lying between her legs, a giant gaping hole where its Adam's apple was supposed to be. The blood that was leaking from the wound was forming a puddle under her feet. He quickly went over to her, pulling her away from corpse's cold embrace. The blonde tightly pressed her against his body, and whispered soothing words into her ear. The mission had changed. Protecting Rias was now top priority. His hand gently rubbed her back while Rias sobbed uncontrollably into his chest. A choking sound was heard. He quickly moved a step away from Rias as she emptied her gut onto the floor. This was undoubtedly the first time she was a witness to such brutality. She killed Lord Bael. One of the women called out, pointing at her as if she was some kind of beast. Rias couldn't react. She just kept pressing herself against her guard, alienating herself from the rest of the world. Look. She isn't denying it. Naruto turned towards the woman, a snarl on his lips. She's in shock, you fucking idiot. The woman took a step back, fearful of the look in his eyes. Where are the doctors? Where are the guards? The blonde yelled. Everyone was just standing there, strang, and fighting with each other. No one had even called a doctor to at least take the boy to be buried. Ruvel Phoenix was the first to get out of his shock. He stepped in, with a look of disbelief on his face, before it turned into a cold one. I want the mansion on lockdown at once, he ordered, and the shocked guards quickly began doing their job. Too little, too late, Naruto thought grimly. The woman had escaped ages ago, of that he was sure. Everyone was so slow to react. It was unbelievable. Most of these nobles here were the young heirs. He couldn't believe he had screwed up everything, again. Why hadn't thought of it before? It was so damn simple. Ruvel turned to him, his green eyes boring into his golden ones. Will he live? The Phoenix asked quietly. He's got a hole in his throat. Do you think hell alive, jackass? Naruto barked out, his features twisting into a snarl. Ruvel nodded solemnly, and called for a couple of guards to take the corpse out. The rest of the night was a blur for most people, but not Naruto. His eyes were scanning the perimeter like a bird of prey. The guests had begun exiting the room in an unorderly fashion, each willing to push the other away just to claw out of what they perceived as a danger zone. Fools, all of them. It didn't take long until Sirzex and Graphia entered the room. By the time that happened, the body was already teleported away and into the morgue. Sirzex was the first to speak up. Care to explain what happened here? It was quite hard to understand the mindless ramblings of the children, he drawled out, but his eyes were firmly locked into Rias' crying form. An assassin, Naruto answered with a grunt. The red-haired man had sneer on his lips. Thank you, Naruto. I thought it was a juggernaut. For the first time in a while, Naruto didn't shoot anything back. The man was stressed and worried, he could identify. Sirzek's eyes moved towards the puddle of blood on the floor, and I am guessing that Cyraorg's blood on the floor, am I right? Naruto nodded, a solemn look on his face. My condolences. I don't need you condolences, the Satan hissed. What I need to know is where you were while all this happened. The blonde man looked towards the ground shamefully. He knew that if he was here, odds are the boy would have lived. But Naruto was never one to hide from responsibility. He looked back up to Sirzex, prepared to take whatever punishment the man deemed fit. Drinking. A truly monstrous wave of pure power hit the room. All the windows shattered as if hit by storm of destruction. Rias had fainted in his arms, not able to withstand so much power in her already frail emotional state. Naruto, however, stood like the immovable object, meeting the unstoppable force head-on. He wouldn't run, had felt worse. Darling. You're hurting Lady Rias, Graphia quickly interjected, a worried look on her face. The next moment, the pressure ceased to exist. Naruto actually raised an eyebrow. It wasn't every day you met someone with such giant reserves and so much control. Do you know anything of whoever was behind this? Graphia asked, her voice cold as the ice she produced. Nothing much, Naruto admitted, taking out the bloody knife from one of his coat's pockets, and extended towards the woman. Ilgot was this. Graphia studied the blade, her pale finger moving towards it from one end to the other. The blade was white as snow, and straight as a line. It was obviously made for stabbing rather than slicing. She nicked her finger on the tip, drawing blood. The few stray drops fell smoothly across the blade, beginning their descent. The silver-haired woman had to bite back a moan of pain. Her finger burned, there was no doubt about it. "Holy steel," she proclaimed, handing the blade back to Naruto. "It appears that I have misplaced your talents, Naruto," Searsex said after what seemed like forever with calmness that only served as a bad act to mask his ire. "From now on you have only one mission. Find whoever did this and bring them to me, alive." Naruto nodded, a determined look on his face, eager for redemption. "Just tell me where to go." Naruto was crouching on a rooftop several blocks away from his target. He could feel the dark emotions brewing beneath the skin. At the moment there was nothing more he wanted to do than tear the man apart, piece by piece. Every step the man took only served to infuriate the blonde even more. For the last 2 hours he had been following the man, known as Mason. He was his only lead on the dagger, because from what Searsex could dig up, he was a member of the cartels dealing with holy steel. Mason swaggered through the dimly lit streets as if he owned them. Also thinking it was appropriate to shout out the winner of his favorite sports team, Basil or something among those lines, he also made sure to throw in some moronic comment to any whore he sees, to which most of them replied by flipping the bastard off. He moved a leisurely pace, walking mostly through the light projected by the worn-out streetlights. The light itself seemed to only reveal his form even more, which only served to disgust the blonde even further. He was a short, round man with a small black beard, but that wasn't what angered Naruto. Choji was admitingly fat, but he was one of the kindest souls he had ever met in his life. No. What pissed him off was the disgusting grin he had on his face, so arrogant. Did the man even have some sort of weapon up to warrant such arrogance? Of course not. In his hand there was no knife or sword, only a fat stack of cash, worn like a badge of honor. A little while back he had passed through a sickly old man who had begged him for money. The bastard had kicked the old man right in the gut, sending him flying towards the wall. He had proceeded to land a couple more times kicks to the old man's already fragile body. The cherry on the cake thought was the end. Mason had actually demanded an apology. He then proceeded to rob the beggar, taking what little money he had in him, before swaggering away, the same grin still on his face. In that moment the shinobi wanted nothing more than to send a kunai hurtling his way, the same treatment that boy in the ball had received, but he preserved, in name of Rias and mission, he had keep on going, following the piece of trash through the underbelly of the human world, his world. Mason honestly reminded Naruto a lot of Gado's thugs back in Nami no Kuni. The same way they held themselves, the same way they treated those who were weaker than them. Naruto was almost sure that there was a Gado-like figure lurking around here somewhere, drinking and raping himself to sleep. At the time he was nothing more than a genin with zero skill, an even bigger mouth, and gigantic chakra reserves. He could understand why Kakashi never let him try his hand in purging the town. He was bound to get a sword through the heart, now? Naruto smirked at the thought. There would be hell to pay. Keep smiling, you fucking cunt, Naruto thought, pursing his lips at the sight before his eyes. Mason had entered what looked like a club of some kind. He could hear the obnoxiously loud music from a few blocks away. It didn't sound like anything he had heard before. There was no semblance of any of the traditional instruments in the elemental nations. No flutes, no drums, no nothing. It honestly resembled the sound coming from Shiho's computer. One of Shikamaru's many admirers more than anything else. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he watched the scene in front of him with utmost clarity. Hey, what's up, mate? Mason laughed, shaking the guard's hand. Or what looked like a guard, tall, broad-shouldered, but with surprisingly good clothes. In fact, they were the same as the suit he had worn on the fateful ball that brought him here. Mason, how has life been treating you? The guard replied with a smile, enveloping the round man in a hug. Mason hugged the larger man, patting him on the back as he did so. The same shit I've been doing for the last 5 years, but this time, he said quietly, or at least gave of the illusion that he was trying to be silent. I am loaded. So better tell your boss that I am comin'. He laughed wholeheartedly. Naruto's eyes widened. He would surely lose him if he entered the crowded club, with a silent dash towards the ground, the pale moon light illuminating his form, which was clad in black, reminiscent of the classic Anbu gear. Naruto walked through the alleyway, his destination being the club, but to do so he had to cross the littered street. Then came something he will never, ever forget. A large steel monstrosity roared right past him, with 2 beaming lights for eyes. It dashed with speed that would have made a Chunin green with envy. Taking a closer look at it, Naruto noted that it vaguely resembled the trains in Snow Country. Technology really did improve with blinding speed. The man in front of him, the very same brute who had let Mason in, was staring at him with a grim frown on his face. I am sorry, man, I can't let you in. The place if full. He also was a piss-poor actor, which elected a smile from the shinobi. Smiling, the blonde pulled out his wallet and took out 50 of whatever currency they used in these parts, and handed to the gorilla of a man. I'll squeeze through. Don't worry about it, Naruto said smoothly, his trained eyes watching the brute place the money in his suit pocket, with the other tips he had received. Just don't go around causing shit, you hear? The brute wasn't threatening him. He was smiling at him, probably thinking of buying the whores who were 50 meters from their current location. Of course, Naruto lied. He wasn't just going to cause some shit, he was going to cause major shit. When he moved past the guard, his hand ever so quickly and silently took Bigger Mon's wallet, right under his nose. After all, corruption was not something to be bred. After walking through a narrow hallway, which was filled with golden guitars and discs on the walls, his blue eyes lightly cringed after entering the main dance room. It took him a few moments to adjust to the lack of light, and the loud electronic music. Roll, roll, die, be my little pie, cause I am no ordinary guy. Cause you're my apple pie. Naruto could barely make out the lyrics, but what he could make out was cringe-worthy. Did Ero Sennin write this or something? The cheese factor went through the roof, and pie was one of his favorite ways of describing the female genitalia. As he stalked through the room, his eyes were met with a beautiful sight, pretty girls, dancing, laughing, singing along. If this was any other day he would have undoubtedly joined them, but, sadly now was not the time to indulge in such affairs, sadly. One of the half-drunken men, a scrawny one at that, bumped into, shouting curses and threatening to start a fight. A quick elbow to the nose stopped him right in his tracks. He wasn't one for enjoying violence a whole lot, but with the amount of pent-up aggression had been having for the last few days really changed his perspective on the matter. Not much occurred after that, aside from women dropping in on him from time to time, grinding themselves against his body in a unique form of dancing. At least dancing had most certainly improved with time. He had noted that Mason had climbed up the stairs in a hurry, losing his swagger as he did so, moving past the VIP lounge, and into the third and final floor of the establishment. Naruto had followed him like a shadow, silent and unseen. After calling forth a couple of clones to guard all the exits, the shinobi crouched towards the keyhole, looking at the scene unfolding on the other side. Mason was talking to a man who shared his physique. The biggest differences between were that where Mason had a buzz cut, the other man had dark oily locks of hair falling all over his face, and where the Maison had a hideous beard, the boss had a stylish, well-trimmed beard. 5 guards, eh? Naruto's thoughts were anything but urgent. He could take them all down easily without having to resort to using any destructive jutsu. Mason smacked the waitress who had just given them drinks right in the bum, causing her to give out a faux giggle of enjoyment. It was her job, and she did remarkably well, if the smirk on the fat Mon's face was any indication. When she came through the door behind her, she growled in contempt, "Fucking asshole." The waitress muttered quietly, her hand on her now sore butt as she walked downstairs. Silently dropping down from the roof, Naruto did a henge, turning into the brutes from downstairs. From what his limited sensory ability had told him, these guys were human, like him, but where he had the wonder of chakra, they had squat. Sometimes it was good to be born a couple of millennia ago. "Excuse me, sir," Naruto called out respectfully, looking down, "but there's some work for you downstairs. I need some help with some shit's gay lil posy." Hey, big guy, Mason laughed, his multiple chins trembling as he did so. "You can't just come here while we're playing cards. It screams disrespect, know what I mean?" Naruto only gave a curt nod at Mason's mockery, but behind his henge he watched with morbid glee as the guards walked out of the room. "So aren't you going to apologize? Or should tell I Vinny here to throw you out with your dick up your ass, huh?" The boss, now known as Vinny, laughed wholeheartedly. "Yay, big man, apologize." "I am sorry," Naruto replied dutifully, the smirk behind the henge turning into an all-out grin. "That's more lick," Mason chuckled, until a kunai shot out Naruto's sleeve, hitting the piece of trash right in the chest, piercing through the wall of fat and bone, and entering his heart. Mason's eyes could only stare with horror in his last few moments, before falling off his chair, slamming into the floor face first, causing the kunai to go even deeper into his body. Vinny was sweating buckets. He most certainly wasn't enjoying the way the night was shaping up to be. "Boys." Vinny howled in fear, to which Naruto replied by creaking the door open, revealing the butchered bodies of the guards lying on the floor. He promptly closed the door. "What the fuck? Who are you? What do you want?" Anything at all." Vinny tried to negotiate, tears stinging down his eyes. By the time the henge dropped, the lower half of Naruto's face was already covered by a black mask. I want you to stay out of the alleys, Vinny. Whatever wild hair you had up your ass about that place is officially plucked, Naruto said coldly. Fine, fine. Just please don't kill me. I am not finished, you fucking vermin. Naruto's voice grew with anger as he took a few steps towards the quivering man, until the only thing that separated them was the table. What do you know of this? Naruto ordered, his commander voice bleeding in as he stabbed the sacred knife into the table. No, nothing. I swear to God, Vinny cried out when he felt a strong hand grasping him by the neck and lifting him up. Swear to me, vermin. Naruto roared, choking the crime boss, slamming him against the wall, hard. Say RPHent, Vinny choked out, unable to break the blonde's hold. ISW ear to YOU. Naruto said, letting him go. The man took long breaths, greedily taking all the oxygen he could. Who is this serpent? I don't know, Vinny replied, clutching his sore throat, but when he saw the eyes, those ice-cold blue eyes narrowed on his form, he quickly elaborated. He didn't come personally, he never does. He sent a woman here to pick the knife. Hot piece of ass, if that would be of any help. Naruto sensed no deception in his words. The vermin was too afraid to lie. I'll let you in on a little secret, Vinny. Naruto began, his voice leaking with hatred. Those boys of yours were doing bad things, but relax. I am through killing your men. Next time, if I see one of your brain-dead thugs so much as spit in the direction of those alleys, I am gonna come back and pay you a little visit, and hang you like I hanged every single one of them I met this night. Vinny only nodded desperately. So here's how it goes. As of now, you work for me, and your job is very simple. Tell me whenever anything concerning this knife happens around here, understand? Got it, fat boy? Yes, I'll do it. Just please don't kill me. Tony fell on his knees, tears strolling down his plump cheeks. Good, it can learn, but do you know what I even am? Naruto chuckled coldly, to which Vinny only shook his head. Let that little mystery keep you up at night. Vinny could only watch in shock as the black-clad man seemed to call forth the very power of nature as howling winds broke through the windows, and with them he disappeared. The former boss could only watch the horrific sight in front of him. Mason's corpse was lying on floor, his own blood acting as a ritualistic burial. The winds shoved the door open, revealing the slaughter in the hall. He gulped audibly, before calling in the waitress. It was horrible, Naruto, the way his eyes look at me with that hollow stare. Rias Gremory cried. The image of Cyraorg's empty eyes will haunt her until her final days, the way those empty, horror-stricken eyes stared at her, like a doll, not a living breathing being. The way his warm life liquid had been splattered on her flesh made her feel defiled, dirty, and disgusted. Her soft flesh was reacting to it like a phantom. Every moment she wasn't touching or staring at her face, she felt the blood there. I know the feeling, Rias-chan, Naruto nodded solemnly. His normally electric eyes had a dimmed quality to them, half-closed and reminiscent about something. What is it, Naruto? Rias asked, her tired blue-green eyes opening wider, making the black spots under them all the more apparent. Nothing, just bad memories, the blonde answered. Naruto, Rias spoke softly, her warm hand gently touching the blonde's whiskered cheek. I don't care if you aren't a servant, you're my friend, and you can speak to me about anything. He looked visibly shaken by her kind words, before his eyes met her, softening considerably. The first time I was someone I was a little younger than you, probably around 13 or so. When I fought him, I was in the thrill of the fight. Adrenaline was coursing through my body. He was twice as fast as me a moment ago, but now I was the one who faster, stronger. I felt like the hunter. A friend of mine had almost died a moment ago. At the time I wasn't sure what came over me. He took a pause, drawing another deep breath. Rias' blue-green eyes stared at him with a mixture of shock and interest. On one hand she was shocked and appalled of the idea of 13-year-old fighting to death. On the other she was interested in seeing how the tale will end, so she kept silent. It didn't take long until I caught him, and began unloading hit after against him. He was nothing more than weak prey before me. I was ready to deliver the finishing blow that would have torn his head right off his shoulders. But, he took a pause, his lips curving into sad smile. But I didn't. I saw who it was. It was a boy I met a few days ago. One that I thought was the only able to understand all the pain I felt, all the suffering I had lived through. I thought he could understand me, and he did, but his true loyalty lied elsewhere. He gave his life for his master, who treated him with less dignity than the dirt he walked. Ria's hand went up to cover her mouth. She was glad Naruto hadn't murdered the boy. But hearing those heart-wrenching words come out of his mouth triggered something within her. She enveloped him in a warm hug, her body pressing itself against his with all the care in the world. Damn, and I was supposed to be the one helping you out, Naruto laughed. Yet there was no sense of happiness in his voice. We are helping each other out, she said firmly, hugging him even tighter. After their tender moment, Naruto left the room slowly, telling her that he was going to find Assassin and bring her in, or die trying. It worried her when she saw the determined look in his electric eyes, but it also seemed to fill her with a new wave of hope, of courage. The very next day went to her brother, asking, no, demanding extra training in the power of destruction. She will never forget the smile he gave her. It was proudest smile she had ever seen on his brother's face. He beamed at her, and handed her 5 big, thick scrolls. When she asked what they were about, brother answered that there lay some of the art's greatest techniques, a legacy passed down for longer than even he could remember. When she asked whether or not he could personally teach her, brother shook his head, and told her he needed to handle the political backlash from the ball, that coupled with his duties as Lucifer and more importantly father left him very little off time in which to train her. That's how she found herself now, sitting in her bed with only a single ray of golden light illuminating the scroll. When calling forth the power of destruction, let it flow through the body, like a steady river. When she was younger, she just called on it randomly, with very little regard for control. She simply destroyed her target, and was done with it. She never saw a greater reason to actually try, before this day. She shut her eyes off, away from the world around her. It took some time before her mind could depart from the physical world around her and enter the spiritual. She felt herself being submerged into her own soul, peacefully swimming in it, rather than drowning. She was searching for her center, the place where all her magic originated from. Ria's face scrunched up, finding it incredibly hard to find her inner core. She felt as if days had passed, her 5 scenes blocked off. She couldn't hear any song, she couldn't take any scent. When she attempted to open her eyes, all she saw was indistinguishable grayness. A certain dread was becoming apparent to her, the dread of being lost, like a child in an endless, dark forest. Then she felt it, a single blood-red drop falling on her shoulder. She panicked, her entire body began to squirm in fear, trying in vain to jerk away from the crimson drop. Her salvation came in the form of a golden ray light coming from her right. Turning around, she saw a giant floating orb of pure magical power. It pulsed with power, constantly sending off various rays of golden luminescence in all directions. It very much reminded her of the sun. A giant golden orb surrounded by inky darkness. There was one thing, however, that was normally not found in the solar system. The sun was connected to something through a large pipe of sorts, quickly floating towards the object, her body lightly brushing against the golden pipe. She examined the item. It turned out to be a large diamond-shaped stone. She carefully ran her fingers over the smooth red surface, feeling it pulse with power by her mere touch. There's definitely something wrong with it, Rias thought curiously. It was constantly leaking with power, the power forming into small crimson drops that were falling into the endless abyss. Not all of the liquid is going through the pipe, but how can I fix it? She thought as leaned against its polished surface, as if responding to her thought. It pulsed again, sending off a crimson wave. She felt herself get enveloped by it, but it hadn't hurt her in the slightest. Turning around, she saw that it had stopped leaking, not completely, but most of it was going through the golden pipe, and into the sun. Ria's eyes snapped wide open, bringing her back to the world she had left behind a moments ago. There was a faint crimson light coming out of her hands. It was of a much higher intensity of everything she had used before. She smirked. Naruto entered a small motel, owned by the Gremory clan. Its old doors seemed to barely keep themselves above ground. And the steps he walked weren't doing much better either. In stark contrast, the decrepit state of the motel. Naruto was humming a happy tune as he walked through the narrow hall and into his room, where everything else in the motel was old, worn out or broken. The key Naruto took out held the same color of his hair, rich gold, and a single blood-red ruby at the end. When he inserted the golden key within the lock, a brilliant light filled the hall. What was revealed in front of him was by no means an ugly, filthy motel room. In its place was revealed a lavish studio apartment, with red and gold colors adorning the walls, and the Gremory sigil resting above king-sized bed. It was truly a sight for sore eyes. After quickly shooting away his sandals to the other side of the room where they impacted lightly against the wall, he jumped towards the giant bed, flying across the room. When he did land on it, he was pleasantly surprised about just how soft and cushy it was. And there was the soft scent of lavender. He hated it. It brought out too many memories back to the forefront. He made a mental note to change it first thing tomorrow. But he ignored the scent in favor of softly letting himself get engulfed in the soft fabric, a serene look on his face. Finally, 2 long nights of little to no sleep, he could rest in peace. Sadly, that was not to be. You still owe an explanation, Naruto. Gamakichi's scratchy voice called from above him. Blue eyes snapped open, and narrowed in irritation at the small toad standing on his chest. Foxes are not nocturnal creatures, you know. Naruto said irritably, pulling his upper body up, and accidentally knocking down the little toad. Standing up, the old toad glared at the blonde. Foxes are also impatient fools, Gamakichi grumbled, picking himself up. You do know foxes eat toads, right? When a fox eats a poisonous toad, the fox dies. What if a fox maws a toad to death with its claws? Can we stop with the anima metaphors? Maybe, Gamakichi cited, a large curve appearing on his lips. I am glad you haven't changed, Naruto. Naruto's eyes softened as he enveloped the old toad in a hug, not the hug a man gives to his pet, no, the hug a man gives to a partner who had saved his life on multiple occasions. I am glad too, Kichi. After finally letting go of his old friend, Naruto couldn't help but ask, so what have you been up to all these years? Not much really, after you killed Madara everything was peaceful, for the first 100 or so years. Gamakichi admitted with a heavy heart, seeing the light dim in his friend's eyes. I don't even remember who shed first blood. All I remember was the call to arms the 7th gave us. However, we retreated back into the rebuilt Mount Myoboku, and severed any contract we might have had with the humans. You're the first one to summon one of in the last era or two. The elder toad chuckled sadly. The years have cast a fog over my memories, my apologies. Patting the old toad on the back, Naruto leaned back into his bed. He wanted to ask so many questions, like what happened to Sakura-chan, Kakashi-sensei, Shikamaru and the rest of his friends, but the answer didn't matter. They were all dead by now. The details were of little importance. I see you came a long way from big-mouthed bratty toad I met during the invasion, Naruto chuckled, to which Gamakichi only replied with chuckle of his own. I could say the same words about you, Orange Man. Gamakichi fell into outright laughter when he saw the ire on Naruto's face. Orange is awesome, TT Ibeo. Naruto replied, sticking his tongue out in a childish manner. He didn't care if his verbal tick bled through, Orange was that awesome. Oh, and, Naruto, the toad said in a questioning tone, looking around the downright lavish home his friend was staying in. How did you get enough money to rent a place like this in such a short time? I work for a noble clan of devils, Kichi, and they pay really well, Naruto said, his voice growing sleepier as he placed his head on the soft white pillow. There's bound to be some food in the fridge. Get some if you're hungry. With an unseen nod, the toad jumped from to the floor. I am afraid I'll be going home. Maybe some other time. Just one last thing, Kichi. What? A fox is considered higher on the food chain. The only reply he received was the sound of cursing followed by poof. It was the only reply he needed, before he let sleep claim his prone form. When morning came, Naruto could always be found at mostly the same place, in his bed, snoring, with the sheet kicked to the floor. There were many of his fellow ninja who strongly opposed this lifestyle. They preferred rising well before the first rays of dawn ever illuminated the village. Some of them were former Anbu, their regime being so harshly drilled into their heads that they just could not bear to wake up any later. There were few things that could wake him up. Nothing less than an important mission, or a really interesting mission could force him back into the land of awakers. Was awakers even a word? He didn't care. There were even fewer things that could actually force him to get his lazy ass of the bed, and into the shower room. These rare occurrences ranged from a village-wide assault, to Sakura-chan during that hellish part of the month. Hearing gentle footsteps approaching his resting place, Naruto gave out a tired sigh, stuffing his head under the pillow, hoping to whatever god existed that this was just some other raven-haired girl with a wide variety of issues. Era, it's time to wake up, Foxy. Of course his luck couldn't have been any worse, naturally. Hiding under you orange pillow will not stop the sun, or me. He could hear the voice growing ever closer to his ears to the point where it felt almost as if she was whispering directly into his ear, so with a sigh on his lips, he finally decided to come out of his hiding spot, by throwing the pillow at her, of course. As the pillow was hurtling her way, Akino didn't seem the least bit concerned. With a single graceful movement, she swatted the pillow away like it was some annoying fly. He slowly crawled out of bed, his eyes squinting when meeting the harsh light of day, before focusing on Akino's smiling visage. At the moment he thought she was the closest thing to an actual devil he had met, the classic look of a red demon with a mighty giant fork, dancing over a pit of suffering paled in comparison to the Akino's simple smile. It sent shivers down his spine, and not just the bad ones. Sirzex came in at close second, but to Naruto, he just seemed too moody. Yes, he did power that could possibly dwarf even Madara's, that was a well-known fact, but he lacked the cunning, and the determination that drove Madara to become the strongest being of his era. Graphia was the knight to Sirzek's day. She had the cunning of a fox, but lacked the raw power which made Sirzex a demon lord. However, If there was one lesson that Naruto learned over the years is that even you have all the power the world could offer stood next to nothing when another came with all the knowledge the world could offer. Looking into Akino, he already knew the reason behind the kindness of Lord Gremory. He wanted someone with a lot of brains to help Rias on her way to lordship, but he also didn't want for them to be equals like Grafia and Sirzex were before them. No, he wanted a tool, forever sentenced to a life of servitude, a crutch to serve Rias in the ways she lacked knowledge of, and when Rias became even cleverer than Akino, then the raven-haired girl's fate would be in Rias' hands. What happened to little Whirlpool? Naruto asks, dragging his feet towards the kitchen to make some breakfast, probably eggs or something of the sort. Akino began following him to the kitchen, all the while holding on to a small envelope. Oh, I am glad you've been listening. Instead of staring, she teased, causing Naruto to simply roll his eyes at her behavior. He was going to have to learn to deal with it. It really didn't have a ring to it. It sounded like I was talking to a little boy, not a man fully grown. Because Foxy really captures my masculinity, right? Completely, letting the jab towards his masculinity slide. Naruto stared at the new-looking fridge, lazily opening it like a certain pineapple-haired Jonin did back in his time. His grip on the door grew stronger, threatening to break it right off the fridge. I forgot it's my first day here, Naruto thought with the same ferocity another pineapple-haired Jonin had when finding her dango supplies empty. Honestly, he should have sent at least one clone to go and buy some food while the other guarded the perimeter. So, are you in the mood for going out to eat? Naruto called out as he put on a pair of blue jeans over his orange underpants. Had rather spend half of his cash on some cafe, rather than show even an inkling of weakness. That attitude wasn't exclusive towards Akino. It was a trait that hadn't died since his childhood. It didn't matter if it was in a fight or simply of getting food to eat. Not that he would complain if someone wanted to buy him something. Iruka-sensei came first to mind. He almost felt bad about milking his wallet dry, almost. Her amethyst eyes glinted with amusement. I would much rather prefer a homemade breakfast, if it isn't too much of a hassle. He breathed in deeply, forcing down the storm that was about to come out. He was almost sure that she knew that he had nothing to eat, like she planned it all in her devious little mind. It reminded him way too much of a certain individual. With the most forced smile he could conjure up on such a short notice, Naruto turned to face her. Sorry, I moved in yesterday, and I didn't get any time to shop, he said, his voice cracking a bit as he did so. Lying really isn't a good quality, Foxy. Wait, what? He frowned thoughtfully before looking back into her glinting purple eyes. She chose to not grace him with a direct answer, instead opting to simply turn her gaze towards one of the beautiful paintings adorning the walls. The one was of a red-haired king sitting on his golden throne, eyes as hard as stone. Turning towards the painting, Naruto frowned. What was he supposed to see? Yay, it was a drawn good and everything, but he never was a man of what most people would consider fine taste. Turning towards the girl in search, all he received is the disappointed shake of her head, with her long ponytail following suit. Before he could ask any more questions, the raven-haired girl spun on her heel, and exited through the door with brisk pace. Hey! Naruto called out, giving chase, his feet hitting against the wooded floor like hammers on an anvil. Wait up. He was uncertain whether or not she heard him. However, the answer was becoming ever clearer judging by the way she continued to increase her speed, never going over the norm of a normal human, but still. He could close the distance within a moment's notice, but where would be the fun in that? He would let her play her little game a bit longer. It was as clear as day that an important reason drove her to his bed this beautiful morning. That sounded like something Ero Sennin would say. It didn't take long until they were both right out of the building, and into the beautiful spring morning. The birds chirped the song that made them famous among humans and devils alike. The sun was rising, casting a bronze veil over the giant buildings that seemed to meet the clouds themselves. Seeing that he could catch up whenever he wanted, Naruto let himself bask in the beauty of it all. He was quickly brought out of his dream by a very familiar sound. The sound, the mechanical monster from last night, giving it nothing more than a stray glance. Naruto could understand it much more clearly now that there was light present. It moved on metallic spheres, covered in what he could only guess was rubber. The thing contained room for what seemed like at least 4 people. Impressive. It didn't seem to be like a horse. It didn't have a heart or a pair of lungs to prohibit exhaustion, so could it in theory go on forever? If it did, then he'd certainly buy one in the future. Anything beats running for weeks on end. Focusing back on Akino, he noted that she was beginning to slow down. A good kilometer from the Gremory-owned hotel, the gears in his mind began to tick ever so slightly. Why did she want them out of the hotel? And what was the fuss over the painting? Was a kind of camera. The ideas behind hidden cameras did not escape the blonde in the slightest. They were extremely popular in his time, They were used for everything one could think of. Chunin exams, shops, streets, even the daimyo used them. With each passing second, the raven-haired girl continued to slow down. Her breathing didn't grow ragger, and he was damn sure she wasn't tired. In the end, it could be said that she was just a regular high school student, moving at leisurely pace, and enjoying her day off. Good acting, though, Naruto, Akino said, turning to face him with the ever-present smile on her lips, and a delicate finger pointing towards the nearest cafe. The sign on it read Cough Paradise. The owner wasn't getting points for originality. Entering, she took him by the hand, as if they were a something they were definitely not. Theatrics? Naruto thought, rolling his eyes, blunt as a hammer. Naruto was never one for theatrics. What are you doing? Having fun? Akino seemed to skip the words at your expense. A couple of grumbling moments later, Naruto was sitting on a comfortable chair, staring right into a porcelain cup, or to be more precise, the coffee within it. Naruto couldn't remember the last time he actually found himself drinking the brownish liquid. His natural stamina was always able to keep him going in most situations. Adding coffee really wouldn't change much, if anything. It's common courtesy to drink when you're with a friend, especially when the friend already paid for your drink, Akino chided, taking sip from her cup, though I am glad you're more reluctant to drink alcohol. Alcohol? Naruto blinked, quickly bringing the cup to his nostrils. He took a deep sniff, akin to a dog more than a man, letting the aroma fill him up. While it certainly did have caffeine in it, he could detect the same kind of alcohol he had drunk at the ball, whiskey, or something like that. Have you not heard about the Irish? They are quite the bunch, she chuckled, unaware of Naruto's future travel plans, but I didn't come all this way just to talk about them. Akino finished, placing her cup on the table, a serious look on her face, a look Naruto would have never imagined on her. I am guessing that Sirzex hasn't sent you to grace me with your presence, Naruto said, drinking down the entire cup in one single gulp. Did he feel like he swallowed a giant fireball made by Madara himself? Yes, he did. Did he care? Absolutely not. Do you have any info on who drove that knife through Ball's throat? It's Bael, she corrected, and no, there is nothing on him, aside from the blade being forged in holy steel, which I think you already know. So you did come to talk about the Irish. Akino seemed to want to say something, but instead chose to continue, but there was a certain edge in her voice. No, but Sirzex-sama was able to dig out who might be known, Akino said, straightening her posture, the great Kyubi no Kitsune of Kyoto, Yasaka. 1,000 thoughts ran through his mind, colliding and intertwining, barely able to form anything cohesive. On the outside, Naruto wasn't faring much better with his mouth agape, and eyes wide as the plates on the waiter's hand. He knew Kurama was still in his gut, he could feel it in his chakra system, so that marked off the idea of him being extracted while he was asleep for who knows how long. A new set of Biju. Possible, considering that Naruto had no idea what was done with Madara's corpse, but Gamakichi's words had a sway on his predictions. The idea was soon discarded too. No one had the raw power or knowledge in order to give birth something as strong as the infamous chakra monsters. A nine-tailed fox. Naruto bellowed, his voice echoing through the cafe, drawing everyone's attention to them. A silence washed over Naruto and Akino as everyone stared at them with a mixture of confusion, irritation, and curiosity. Akino bit her lower lip in frustration. A moment later, Naruto found a pair of soft lips pressing against his. He didn't blush. What was he? 13 or something. The shock quickly wore off, and he melted into the kiss. Akino seemed gentle all the way through. Soon enough he felt her drawing back into her seat, a smile lighting up her face. Whoa, hot damn, that was good. Not even gonna ask what brought that up. Since you're such a good kisser, I'll answer anyway. The raven-haired girl giggled, and Naruto promptly puffed his chest out in pride. Public displays of affection make people very uncomfortable. Humans are very prudish, she said, shooting a sideway glance towards the people, and to Naruto's surprise everything she said was true. Prudes they were. Now, tell me about this Kyubi, is she a powerhouse? Naruto questioned, frowning. He needed to know as much as possible about this new Kyubi, because he wasn't sure exactly what'll happen when they meet, or worse, if they collide. Thoughts of a gigantic nine-tailed fox lashing out, smashing mountains, and sending tidal waves crashing to the shores were indeed very gruesome, or how Shikamaru would put it, troublesome. Is she strong? Akino said, her violet eyes twinkling with something Naruto did not like. She's to be incredibly strong, on par with the Satans. The Yukai even say she's stronger than Sirzex-sama, but that's nothing more than their bravado speaking. If I had to compare them, the Kyubi is nothing more than a grain of sand in the storm, so don't let them intimidate you with their foolishness. Your travel arrangements are already set. Tonight you depart for Kyoto, at exactly 10 o'clock. Gotcha. I'll be going to ask Kyubi-chan about what has been happening with the ball air for the last few months. And I'll be back just in time for end of the World Cup, Naruto said, grinning from ear to ear. Long ago he learned how to exude confidence. No matter how much uncertainty hid underneath that grin. The first time he used was during the Chunin exams when he was going to fight Neji, someone who at the time completely outclassed him. If he had shaken, Neji would have pounced like shark. If he trembled, Neji would have pounced. It was the confidence. The false sense of power was what froze Neji at his tracks. No matter what he faced, whether it'd be a Satan, a king, or a god, Naruto would show no fear, no matter how much it tried to bleed through the cracks. Era, not even going to say goodbye. You may indeed need some discipline, Akino giggled sinisterly, causing a chill to go up the blonde's spine, stopping him in his tracks, and sitting his butt back on the chair. There was something so wrong with the girl. Don't worry, it's just a quickie, she teased, her hand going into her blouse. Naruto wasn't one to deny himself such a pleasant sight. Her hand began digging, which was answered by a light movement from her large breast. Damn, she was like teenage Ba-chan. Ero Sennin would be getting a real hard-on in his grave. After what seemed like hours, sweet blissful hours, Akino plucked out a page from her blouse, gave it one final look, and handed to Naruto. Soon after picking the page up, he understood what it was about. It wasn't some secret document from Searsex, it was a story, or at least a fragment of one. From the Journal of Rias Gremory, June 7, year 2014. My room is as ugly as any other one in this despicable mansion. There's no beauty, only a veil to hide the disgusting flesh within. My cousins clutter the place, sewing, always sewing, and tutoring me about what a great opportunity this was, acting as if they know best. Their needles may be sharp enough to their job, but their minds were as dull. I hate them with their dull little minds, and their big mouths. Looking back at what I wrote yesterday makes me feel sick to my stomach. I haven't got a clue what kind of mad thoughts drifted in my mind before I met Riser Phoenix. I thought he was a true gallant, a true prince who could sweep of my feet, hand me a red rose, and steal my heart just I would steal his. To this day I haven't met a more vile man. He swaggers in with not one, but two of his whores, having the nerve to call them my future sisters, and that was the high point in our meeting. What followed could only be called disgusting. We walked through the gardens. His whores still firmly latched onto his shoulders, throwing kinky whispers at each other, and scowling at me whenever our eyes met. At one point, from out of nowhere, he began playing with one of them. Her moans and screams echoed through the gardens until she became nothing more than a sniveling dog on the ground. The other one was jealous of the entire predicament. She pestered him to give her the same treatment, and after a few minutes he hit her in the face so hard the teeth flew out, and blood gushed out of her mouth, and even after all that, she smiled at him. After that he smiled at me, and his hands began roaming all over my body. He actually thought I would another whore at his service. Ha! That shot of destruction that tore through his crotch taught him a lesson. Of course, being a phoenix, it regrew a moment later, but he got the point, or at least I thought he did. Now that there was nothing to hide his member, he beckoned for his injured whore, to which she willingly complied. Riser ordered her to suck, and she did so happily. I promptly walked away in disgust, alerting any guard I passed by. I will not marry him. I don't care how much it may help my family, or even all the devils in the underworld. I spent the rest of the day arguing with father and mother about the marriage, but they were adamant, so I took my fate into my own hands. I searched for a way to settle this legally. My answer came in the form of the rating games. Naruto gave the letter one last look over. The idea of forced marriages was not something new or unfamiliar to him, even though he had always found the idea not to his liking. Judging by your expression, I assume you've read through Rias' letter. I read it. Don't how I can help, though, Naruto replied quietly, handing back the page. It seemed like not all traditions withered by the sands of time. Akino's face scrunched up into a deep frown, violet eyes glowing like twin orbs of fire. I didn't take you for a coward, Naruto-san. Sadly, Rias also didn't take you for one. How the fuck am I a coward, huh? What can I do if her parents are assholes? Naruto snarled, his hands tightening into fists. Look, I'll help. Just tell me what I need to do. You could always just join Rias' peerage, and help her defeat Riser. Akino said, her voice as gentle as silk now. The fire in her eyes was put out, and replaced with serenity once more. I am not becoming anyone's slave, got that? I'd sooner slit my own throat than become a willing slave to anyone. Akino seemed to want to say something, but whatever words she going to say died in her throat. Can't I just replace someone on your team? I know Rias' peerage isn't full, so I can just take a temporary position as pawn, Naruto said, his voice trailing off. It seemed impossible that at least for once the mission was going to be the only thing he had to worry about. Akino said, her index finger resting on her chin. I suppose I can ask Lady Rias if it's possible, but I doubt it is. If such a rule exists, then what would stop the Demon Lord to just join and win the entire game? Naruto raised his hands up defeat. He was unfamiliar with the more lucrative rules of the rating games. All of his information stemmed from rating games. History of the modern evolution. Well, I'll be off now. I need to report to Lady Rias, Akino said casually, an absent-minded look on her face. But don't think it's the last time we'll see each other. Naruto-san. Lady Rias needs help, and as her queen I will bring her that help. Mountains were a great leveler. When a merchant enters Konoha, the first thing that steals his gaze is the Hokage monument. They dwarfed him in a way that no building could. It made him feel like nothing more than an ant on the body of an elephant. And the Hokage monument is built on a small mountain. It has been said numerous times that Naruto had a stubborn streak. Naruto was never one to believe that the Hokage should sit in his office like a caged animal, or that a cage should be commended to not venture off in his own land. So in between training, talking with various greedy merchants that seemed to have an imaginary iron hold on the village, and speaking to the bigoted clan heads, Naruto had took up climbing, by the idea of his sensei, who later received an earful from a certain pink-haired medic nin. Climbing, it turned out, was completely foreign to most shinobi. Chakra made it a breeze to carry yourself over rough terrain. However, the dangerous slopes of a something twice as large as the Hokage monument was too much even for Chakra. It need work, real hard work, not to say Chakra wasn't a welcome crutch, but it by no means magic. A few days later Sakura had come to criticize him over his dangerous venture. Sakura had so many words about the dangers of climbing that Naruto felt she could write an entire book about it. She probably could, she always was smart. But there was one thing she never understood about the mountains. They held no judgment, no predispositions, and certainly no agendas. They gave him the freedom he desperately craved, freedom from the village he had sworn to protect, and most importantly, freedom from the butcher known as Madara Uchiha who haunted every other moment of life. Madara was momentarily weakened for a good deal time, perhaps the first 6 to 7 months of the first year. The Butcher of Nations had retreated back to his own personal dimension for the time being, but his presence was felt all around the elemental nations. Are you feeling ill, Uzumaki-san? A female voice called out to him. Turning around, Naruto had to remind himself of his companion, a beautiful woman with brown eyes, and flowing dirty blonde hair, a darker tone than his own. I am feeling a bit under the weather, he said. The fact that the act of marching up a street with a beautiful in tow made him reminiscent about his time climbing mountains was not a good sign. With each step, he felt as if his body was growing ever heavier, and the thick mist obscuring his eyes made the atmosphere ever more akin to the greatest of mountains. Are you sure? We can always take a break if you need one. Her voice sounded sincere, too sincere if someone asked him. Naruto couldn't take a break. His body was telling him that if his feet stopped marching, he would collapse like a sack of potatoes. I'll manage. At least until a damn storm hits the city, Naruto said, grinning. If he could survive the frozen desert Yuki no Kuni, while fighting off Snow Ninja, then he was damn sure that a street wouldn't be the place his bones would lay. The woman was acting very much like the weather, cold and frigid. It made the entire journey even more painful for the blonde, but he carried on, and with each hard step on the old stone sidewalk an echo was sent off. Not so much an echo of sound, although the complete lack of life around hadn't crossed that out completely, but an echo of chakra. A chakra that seemed far rawer than his or any other human for the matter. The woman next to him was passively exuding the chakra since they had met. Naruto grinned. She thought she was so damn clever, thinking that she was leading him into uncharted territory, never realizing that she was leading him where he wanted to the den of the yokai, to the place he had traveled who know how many miles, by teleportation via demonic circle and train. So, where are we going? He said, his curiosity beating the rational part of his mind into submission. A place a servant from the Gremory clan is bound to know, she replied coldly, her lips creating a silent snarl. Humor me then, Naruto said, frowning, and I am free as a bird. How sweet, she chuckled for a while. The cold seemed to freeze that smirk on her lips. He hoped her cunt would freeze as well. As he looked at her, the distinct sense that she wouldn't answer his question came to him. The thought of driving a Rasengan in her now twice frozen over cunt proved hard to push down. The remainder of the walk proved to be uneventful, unless one would count the her as interesting. By end of it, Naruto was dragging his feet, not from a lack of energy. More like the chakra on the sidewalk was quicksand to him. With every step its grip tightened, and no amount of the chakra his channeled at his feet seemed to help him dig out of it. The Yukai hadn't noticed the brief pulses of chakra he had been sending to his feet, but that didn't really give him much comfort. A pair of gates emerged in the distance, gates that were far larger than what was right for a city the size of Kyoto. The old grumpy asshole hiding behind those gates must have felt the sensation of blood rushing down his lower regions when he saw the woman, or at least that's what Naruto's explanation was for those giant dark gates to slowly open up, grazing the ground as they did so. When the gates closed, Naruto felt like a different man. The sickness that plagued him for the last hours was blown away by the warm wind of spring. Yes, spring. The lavish garden unveiled itself in front of him, his mouth opened slightly in silent gasp. He couldn't put his thoughts into words. There was pleasant voice in the air, angelic even. It sung a slow melodic song that was pure bliss to his ear. Naruto found himself smiling at the tune, something which evaded the woman next to him. She held a sour frown on her face as if the notes were countless needles driving into her ears. Weird. He followed her, the tune still playing, into the largest house in the gardens. It was small fortes in his eyes. The music almost made him notice the impending long conversation, almost. Speak out of line and I will slit your throat, hope you make it clean cut then. Entering the large room, it was by no means as large, or as lavish as the Gremory Hall, far from it actually, but it did serve its purpose. When one was to enter it, the feeling of it being a small little bug set in. However, Naruto never felt small, even when he was the runt that painted the Hokage monument. The Kyuubi of Kyoto? Naruto said, not fearful of a simple blade, though you'd be bigger. The woman who he was addressing held not the stone look of an emperor, or the bloodthirsty face of the warlord. Instead she held the face of a woman who could maneuver through wars and courts skillfully. Briefly, the image of an auburn-haired woman flashed in front of him. I thought the Gremory would send a devil, a very blonde-haired Mei Terumi, with matching golden eyes, and much to his pleasure. Assets that matched the late Mizukage's to the T. Keep your tongue in your mouth before the brown-haired woman spat before she was interrupted. Cut it off. Gotcha, Naruto joked, a smirk finding itself on his lips, but now onto business, miss. Yusaka. The Kyuubi said calmly, motioning curtly for the other woman to leave, which she did within a moment's notice, sending one last glare his way. Naruto loved those glares, they made him feel so special. I am guessing you're here due to Lord Bale's recent passing? Hit the nail on the head, Yusaka-san. She straightened her posture on her throne, golden eyes staring right into blue eyes. The Yukai of Kyoto had nothing to do with the tragedy that happened a week ago. There was steel in both her voice and soul. Yusaka's voice resonated with confidence, power, and intelligence. All the qualities a good leader need. All the qualities that made a soldier want to die for you. Please do send my deepest regrets to Lord Bale. Naruto raised a blonde eyebrow. Wasn't he the fat cunt that shunned his own son? Yusaka stared at him, probably thinking he either had balls the size baseballs, or a brain of similar size. Naruto knew it was the former. Nevertheless, send my deepest regrets. Sure, he won't. I never thought Sirzex fancies people of your kind in his court. Naruto sat, his legs crossed as usual. The woman was friendly, and while most high-ranking nobles might want his head rolling down the stairs, he had a distinct feeling she wasn't like that. And what kind of people does the great Sirzex Gremory fancy? It is not my place to say, though. If you're feeling curious, ask him. Naruto had a few ideas of what kind of people Sirzex enjoys surrounding himself with, and none of them were to his liking. And what kind of man am I? She smiled. Kami-sama hasn't cut you from the cloth of royalty, nobility, and wisdom. No, you are made of steel, both body and soul. Naruto decided not to comment on that jab towards his intelligence. He stood up, abruptly turning his back to her, and began the long march towards the exit. I'll snoop around then, ask a few questions, hopefully get a few answers, and I'll be on my way. Her tongue clicked. I don't remember giving you my approval. I don't remember needing it. As he was marching down the hall, the doors suddenly flew open, revealing two men clad in white from head to toe. The taller one had the left side of his face mangled as if he was attacked by some wild beast. The shorter one shared the same scars. Only difference was that they were on the right side of boyish face. The kid couldn't be older than 14. Forgive USS for the interruption. Yusaka Dono, Naruto Ssan is called by Mahu-sama, the boy said, or more likely hissed, his voice small, yet devoid of any of the childlike wonder it should be full off. His eyes stared Naruto, but they didn't, they were looking right past him, into something Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to know. And what does your master want with my guest? Yusaka said, her voice dripping with disgust. Ever since those two entered the hall, her features turned downright feral. and he could feel himself sweat beneath the heat that suddenly filled the hall. I was as not told. The boy's reply was short and simple. When Naruto's eyes tried to find the boy's gaze, the older man turned his way, hissing lowly, displaying his razor-like teeth. It was obvious who was the brains or what was left of them and who was the bronze. Then leave our presence at once. I will not subjugate my guest to the rambling of a woman gone mad. The boy's eyes flew wide, his posture crumbling by the might of fear. Place ease. Mahu-sama won't be happy. His voice was pitiful, weak, and most of all, begging. His posture may not have showed it, but he was like a man on the guillotine. Naruto decided to intervene. He always did have a soft spot for kids. Ill go, Naruto said, his voice trivial as if he was speaking about the weather. Ill meet whoever sent you. Just calm down there, kid. Naruto offered him a grin as his hand went to ruffle his hair, only to find it shaved clean. The boy looked at him through broken eyes, nodding his head. The older man at his side, the one Naruto guessed was his father, looked none too pleased if the silent sneer on his face was any indication. Ah, so we will be seeing the old with witch then, Yasaka said with a roll of her eyes, and within the next moment she was at his side. Come on then, I haven't seen the old snake in a while. The ancient walls shimmed in the summer heat as they approached. They must have been impressive a few thousand years ago. Now only black stone that seemed to barely hold out against the winds remained, but the look of admiration Yasaka was giving off when she gazed them did raise the idea that they were probably enchanted by a magic of some kind, or what was more reasonable to him, fuinjutsu. His opinion of Kyoto brightened the moment he set foot in Yasaka's estate. The air held exotic scents, spices that made his stomach growl, and heavenly music that made quick work of his foul mood. The yokai strolled, loud in voice and covered in silk which spanned all the colors of the rainbow. People got out of our way, sparing only a joyful greeting towards their leader. It made Naruto a little bit jealous. He loved it when the citizens of Konoha greeted him in the same loving manner. Didn't know you had snake witches writhing around here, Naruto said, not completely comfortable with the idea of meeting something akin to a snake. His previous bouts with Orochimaru and Kabuto had plucked out any admiration for the animal. That combined with the elusive serpent who pulled the hit at the ball only reinforced that notion. Trust me when I say that if I had my way all that would be left of her would be the stench of a burning corpse. Yasaka's reply came out spiteful, hateful even. Perhaps the snake witch bit her. He chuckled at the thought, however. He did make a note to remember the burning part. And why don't you? Why don't I what? Make roast snake out of her. Yasaka chuckled. The white-clad man shake in what Naruto presumed was silent fury. I don't want to drown my people in her stench. Soon the pleasant scents faded, replaced by the stench of raw meat. Naruto subtly looked around, his eyes finding countless men, women, and children cuddling around each other, eating raw meat from some unknown animal. He shuddered. They had reached the dugout faster than expected. The boy and his father silently dismissed themselves, but not before kneeling in front of the dugout, their foreheads glued to the earth. Naruto entered first, careful not to hit his head on the way in. Yasaka being a head shorter than him had no such problems. SSIT, the snake witch said, her voice old and raspy. Naruto didn't like this place. It was filled with dead things hanging on chains. Some didn't even seem completely dead. His instincts were telling him to hightail it out of there, or to drive a Rasengan through her weak body in hopes of shattering it apart like a piece of glass. His mind was telling him to be respectful, and sit down quietly. The middle ground was to stay on his feet, completely aware and ready to fight if necessary. Not smart, but not foolish. At least you're better than my other guest. Yasaka was twitching. The reason for this evaded him. She outstretched her hand, and soon golden flames blossomed. She used the flames to light the nearest torch. Ero Sennin had said that some things were better left in the dark. This was one of them. When the light illuminated the dugout, two milky white eyes stared at them, dead eyes, with one single third eye resting above the two, blood red in color. It constantly twitched as if it was an insect. You know I dislike bright lights, Yasaka. Her voice was a hollow hiss as hollow as her cheeks. The witch had almost no hair left on her scalp aside from a few stray strands of white. Why aren't trying to make me laugh with hissing? Naruto half joked, half serious. A step towards foolishness, the snake witch rambled, speaking to herself rather than to him. Boy, when you've lasted for as long as I have, you learn how to correct something simple like your speech. He gave her points for at least answering. Thanks, Naruto said. She didn't honor him with the appropriate remark, not that he cared enough to ask for it. Yasaka-chan, excuse us, this is a matter of no real concern to you, the witch said, her long fingers finding themselves playing with a stray ant. Everything within my land is my concern, Yasaka replied coldly, crossing her arms under her chest. Mahu squashed the ant effortlessly. Fine, but dare not interrupt me when I am speaking. Mahu threatened, her voice venomous like her animal of choice. And what will you do, Mahu? Raise your magic against me, and I'll light you aflame faster than you could screech your first curse. Yasaka's reply was just as venomous, if not more so. Naruto decided to stop their interaction before he caught in the inferno. Yasaka, please, let her speak so we can leave, he whispered in her ear, though the crimson eye was following his every movement. My hearing hasn't died in my old age, Mahu grinned, showing a single rotting tooth stump. So has my power. Ask Yasaka-chan later if you do not believe me. Naruto had no plan to ever ask anything about Mahu. Quicker than his father, Mahu's old hand gripped his naked arm. Her skin was like say paper. Old, dry, but with power lurking beneath it. It didn't much strength for Naruto to jerk his hand out of her grip, but it felt hollow. It felt like she allowed him to free himself. The skin on his left arm was crawling and shuddering because of the weird sensation. You got rules and your principle, thinking that they're the blade to fight the world with, but they really are poison, slow poison. It will kill you in time, the voe. Who the fuck are you talking about? And why are you calling me hero? Naruto shouted, afraid. The shadows around her seemed dance like snaked to her voice, never stopping. Do not interrupt me again, child of prophesy, she hissed, her rotten tongue on full display as spit flied out of her mouth. I have voice, hero. A voice that hates to love, and loves to hate. A voice that has the power to rule your faith. Whatever words he had to say dies in his throat. 3 simple words killed them. Child of prophesy. It was impossible for her to know the moniker the late Toad Sage gave him. She couldn't have lived that long, could she? I see you. Mahu cackled, her voice echoing throughout the dugout. You defeated the one called the Butcher. But then what happened? You sank into darkness. The world around you fading into nothingness. But you thought you were alone. She grinned. Oh, no, no. Something followed you. The world was becoming blurry to his eyes. A sudden sharp pain in the back of his head made him crumble to his knees in pain. Breathing in a fresh dose of air almost made him choke. The air felt so condensed, so harsh, like it was poison. It seems it doesn't want you to know. How very interesting indeed. Her voice was amused. Amused in the sense of a snake playing with its mouse, but it always lurks, always watches. Naruto screamed. The pain was becoming too much. He felt his head explode, and dirty the walls with fresh blood 1,000 times. He could hear Yasaka shouting, and see flames dancing. Then everything stopped. Little feet danced into Naruto's consciousness. It was a strange and annoying sound to hear when you were resting. When resting, he preferred the gentle perfection of silence. Sadly, silence was something he rarely got. Ever since his stays in the Konoha hospital, he had grown accustomed to idea of company. Company that in his later years had shrunk down to one single individual. At the beginning everyone would come. Even people that didn't know him personally. They wanted to see Konoha's hero. It felt nice in the first couple of months. People constantly being at your side, caring about you, wishing you the best. The best part of it all was when they divulged in stories. It was basic human instinct to want to listen in on other people's conversations, nothing shameful there. Naruto chuckled, fondly remembering one of the many arguments between Shikamaru and Temari. They were so much fun to listen into, with Temari's boisterous shouts of pain which were followed by a snarky reply from the lazy genius. The time though he was cheating with some girl from the cryptanalysis team. If Shika didn't have such trained reflexes, Naruto guessed that his head would have rolled into his bed. Another good thing about Temari was that she was creative with her curses, unlike Sakura-chan who more often than not merely used variations of the word idiot, a real spectacle indeed. Someone touched his whiskers and his eyes leapt open. Only a startled gasp could be heard until his eyes focused in on the culprit, a little girl, maybe around 10 years old at most, her eyes so wide that they covered half of her already small face. "Bu!" The little girl screamed with all decibels a here tiny form could muster. "Mother! Mother!" He groaned. Her scream made 1,000 senbon piercing his ears look kind. He let himself fall down into soft pillows. Soft? He thought in surprise. That meant that at least he wasn't in a hospital. The pillows in the Konoha hospital were as hard as bricks and as comfortable as a hammer to the skull. The girl ran out of the room with the speed of a genin, her 9 golden tails straight as arrows. Wait, 9 golden tails. The only other woman with 9 tails and blonde hair was Yusaka, so that meant that the girl was Yusaka's niece. Hopefully, it was her niece, because he had a hard time imagining a woman of Yusaka's years with a child of 10. Yusaka was in her late 20s at most. So that meant that she had a husband, who was oddly absent from the meeting. Naruto breathed out a sigh, just when he thought on putting the good ol Uzumaki moves on her. In his boredom, he looked around the room, and found it by surprisingly well crafted. The wide windows were thrown open, letting in some of the fresh, spice-filled Kyoto air. The ceilings itself was even well taken care of, molded into fine shapes. I should have warned you she smelled bad, Yusaka said, entering the room with a servant behind her. Seeing the look on his face, she added, too late. The servant set plate full of fish in front of Naruto, along with a cup of steaming tea. He guessed that it was herbal judging by its scent. Within less than a second a connection was forged, a connection known since the dawn of time. The bond between a man and his food, like a true animal he ravished the dish within minutes, with only the shocked gasps of the servant making themselves known. Looking up, he saw that Yusaka was staring at him in a mixture of awe and disgust. It heavily leaned towards the latter. I am glad you're feeling better, Yusaka said, waving off the servant girl. The girl left the room, staring at Naruto in fear of being devoured like the rest of the fish. When we told Searsex Dono about your condition, and he was very worried, Yusaka said, absently raising an eyebrow. How close are you two? Naruto looked down at his plate, and seeing that it was empty he shrugged his shoulders, and turned towards his fellow blonde. Not that much really, Naruto said, drinking the last of his tea, but overall he's a cool guy. Is he now? Yusaka said, a calculative look making itself known. Then you're close to his sister, perhaps? He schooled his features. She was asking too many questions, the answers to which weren't hers to know. I am not on trial, Yusaka-san, he said, a certain coldness that was attained during 100 council meeting bleeding into his normally cheerful voice. In fact, I'm here to ask you questions, not the other way around. He neatly placed his teacup on the drawer to his left. Forgive me for intruding onto your personal matters, Uzumaki-san, she said calmly, without single crack in her voice. She really had a nice poker face, and a nice face in general. He couldn't imagine how many men had fallen victim to her charm and wit over the years, but he knew better. He had to show his A-game since the whole Phoenix Ball debacle. But can you answer one last question for me, Uzumaki-san? He nodded. Why didn't you tell me you hailed from the eastern lands? She asked attentively, her voice soft and casual, the perfect hook to draw his interest. She underestimating him if she thought he'd fall for it so easily. When she looked at him, she continued, I mean your looks are that of a Westerner, but you speak with the honorifics that are only known in the eastern lands. Naruto smiled. At least some part of the elemental nation's culture survived throughout the years. Let's call it a long, long story. Alright. It interesting him that Rias used the Kun honorific with him, though, he'd look into that later. Yusaka obviously wasn't going to intrude on him. She was great diplomat from what he could see. She knew when to try to scout for info and when not to, had personally given her the Anbu mask if they were back home, and their positions were reversed. Now let's get down to business, Naruto said, his electric blue eyes diving right into her hazel ones. Tell me everything you know about Cyroorg Biel, and everything that happened around him during his stay in Kyoto. Her reply came within an instant. There isn't much to say really, Yusaka said, the warm and casual air still around her like she was a beacon of light. I am willing to get the scarps, Naruto insisted. She wasn't going to leave this room without at least telling him something. It might be the name of the killer, it might the guy's favorite color, but he was getting something out of this. She seemed ever friendly as she spoke. If you insist, then I'll tell you all I think will be of interest to you, Yusaka said. Cyroorg-san was truly a good man. He told me how he gave stray devils a second chance. I honestly wouldn't know someone who would be willing to hurt him, let alone kill such a kind soul. Naruto rolled his eyes. He already read the guy's bio. I don't know how it is in your culture, but back home speaking ill of the dead isn't something bad. That was absolutely true. Even over 20 years after the White Fang's death his name was still only brought up when there were talks of cowardice. Yusaka's brow furrowed uncomfortably. He was a bit hot-headed. Some of my citizens say he got into fights on a regular basis, but still, even when he won he always helped out the loser, even buying him a drink. She chuckled. Some of the men wanted to fight him just for the free drinks afterwards. Naruto frowned, feeling the clutches of guilt over his heart. He knew there were other guards there, but he felt like he could have made a difference that night. Maybe that's why the woman had seen fit to make a shooting star of him. I don't think he even had any enemies. Now that's where she was wrong. Every man had enemies, no matter how kind, or how just he was. Every man had enemies. Some just preferred the comfort of the shadows. If anything, I believe him to be a casualty of a larger conflict. He looked up, feeling something he could grab onto. She knew what he was going to ask, so she quickly added, a conflictlet I know nothing about. He breathed out a sigh in disappointment. He didn't even find out what his favorite color. His palms clenched into fists. A dead end, he thought grimly. His only lead turned out to be a dead end. It was times like these that he truly felt powerless. In a fight, even if he was up against a man who was 100 times stronger than him, there was always a shot at victory. Here on the other hand, in the off chance she was lying, he could do nothing. He was well aware that if he so much as lay a hand of her itd in international scandal, and the blood of the innocent is never far away from these cases. I won't give up, no matter what. Hell find a way to find the murderer, even if it takes him to the ends of the world. He'd do it in a heartbeat. I am glad to see that I haven't dulled your ambition, Yusaka said, smiling, showing her perfect teeth. No surprise there. I am glad that a good man will shed light on another good man's death. I believe you can do it, Uzumaki-san. Call me Naruto. He was the brat that would go to the most respected man in the village, kick the door open, and call him old man. His dislike for anything formal went both ways. He never said anything against Konohamaru, the head of the Sarutobi clan, calling him Oni-chan. Naruto was a free bird. Maybe that's why he hated formality, because it shackled people into being socially correct. And maybe he just didn't give a damn. Yusaka's smile widened ever so slightly. You would be surprised about how similar you are to Cyborg-san. Naruto lied in his bed for hours after Yusaka had left. There was an urgent meeting demanding her attention, and promptly apologized. Yusaka told him that she'll try to be back in a couple of hours. He knew she won't. If any of his own council meetings had taught him anything, it was that they never ended until every single son of a bitch flapped his gums, especially the urgent ones. Those tended to force an all-nighter. By the timer they were over, there was barely enough energy in his body to move him to his personal bedchambers. That posed a problem, though, when he was by himself. Alone in the room, memories were free to do as they pleased. A ghost of a pale-skinned, blue-haired, lavender-eyed woman stared back at him with all the worry the world in the world. She was always there when he was bedridden, always watching, always helping. It made him feel like trash every time she'd come to greet him and help him, always expecting an answer from him, never receiving. That did nothing to stop her. She continued to come, if only for the company. It wasn't false kindness. He remembered getting hit by a terrible poison during the second year. He barfed all over the floor. She had embraced him until he was done shaking. Then she personally rolled her sleeves and cleaned up the vomit herself, not wanting to bring any of the Anbu stationed to guard him. She did it all without ever uttering a word of complaint. Naruto felt all the more guilty for it. Silence offered tranquility to those who had a peaceful heart, but it only served as cold hell to those that didn't. Kuno came in. Her small hands were enveloping a large, old-looking book. May I come in? She asked shyly, her eye glued to the marble floor. You already came in. Naruto thought fondly. Some of his best memories were those when he came to the old man for company, had come in, shout, and then demand a story from the old man. Sure. He almost said make yourself at home, but she was at home. What's that book you've got there? Kuno looked surprised at his warm demeanor. She must have been expecting a wicked devil of sorts greeting her with sharp pointy teeth, and a long snake-like tongue. Orochimaru seemed more and more devil-like every time he thought about it. Was one of his experiments the first devil? Far-fetched, but not completely impossible. Naruto wouldn't put anything past that man. Kuno stared down at the book, her voice quiet. I was, hoping you could, read me a story. She had the cutest look on her face. She reminded him a lot of Konohamaru's girlfriend, Maegi? Majetti. He couldn't quite point out her name. He was only ever close to Konohamaru himself, never that much to his friends. Sure. But don't you have guards and servants to do that? Naruto was very aware of the dangers the world held. He didn't expect anything less from Yusaka than the maximum amount of protection for her one and only daughter. Yay, I do, but they don't know that I have a way of sneaking out, she chirped, her 9 tails waving around her. Cute, indeed. It was probably wiser to call the guards. Tell them that she snuck out. It'd be the grown-up thing to do. He wasn't 12 anymore. He was a responsible adult who had to take safety before anything else. Who was he kidding? Just tell me which story you'd like to hear. She happily handed him the book, of course being as delicate as possible, and took her place on the chair right next to the bed. When he asked her about which story she wanted to hear, her reply was Legend of the 100-Tailed Kitsune. How I used to love stories like this one, when the brave heroes defeated the evil villains without a care in the world, when being a good guy meant more than just placing your bets on a 17-year-old cage, when being a bad meant that you were born rotten to the core. Can men like Nagato and Obito be considered evil? They sure as hell weren't saints, but they weren't monsters either. They seemed to want to make the world a better place in their own twisted way. Maybe I like them because I could have become a mirror image of them if a few moments in my life went to shit. In the stories, killing someone meant him falling down while the hero stood victorious. That was probably the biggest I've read in a while. When you slit his throat, his still warm blood would spray itself onto your hands. If the body stays under the sun for too long, it will begin to create an infamous stench. When a body is burned by the very fire Kuno was playing with, the stench could make a grown man run away. Naruto hated killing more than anything. Sadly, the world loved blood. He remembered when killed Vinny's men in the nightclub. They weren't good people. Hell, most of them were trash, but who was he to judge? All the faces of the men and women he murdered for the village had piled together in his mind. Had always say that it had to happen, that it was for the betterment of the world, for the safety and happiness of his precious people. That didn't stop it from leaving a sour taste in his mouth. The more he thought about it, the more he distanced himself from the idea of being any closer to his Rinnegan-wielding distant cousin. Nagato was effortlessly played by Obito, who ironically was played by Madara. There were no phantom strings making Naruto dance, he made sure of that. It was one of the reasons why he opposed the idea of Fate or Kami. There was no higher being making him dance to its tune. No, there were only choices. Choices he concisely took and had live with for the rest of his life. Some were wise, some not so much. What was important was that they were his, and if the old witch was right about some ghost from the past being stuck in the same time as him, then let him come, because Naruto was always ready for a fight. Believe it, by the time he was done reading the story, Kuno was already in the land of the dreamers. She even snore lightly, like cute little kitsune. She truly was an adorable child. She snored lightly, her kitsune ears twitching was beyond cute. His hand moved towards her head, brushing against her hair. A cute little frown glided into her adorable face when he stopped. Naruto gently picked her off the bed, and placed her in his arms. Opening the door, she cringed when it creaked audibly, but with the subtlety of a shinobi, Naruto carried her gently through the long wooden hallways. With each step he took, the sound of creaking never reached her furry ears. His movements were neither slow, nor fast. He didn't hand her to any moronic guard. Understandably, they were loud and sure wake her up. He found her room a few moments later. It was easily recognizable with the large pink sign that read Princess. Considering the lack of nobility in the mansion, he bet that this was her room. If not, he was careful enough to not draw attention to himself. He hated not doing it, but, in the end he could do it. Naruto just had to put his mind up to it. He leaned her small body against his chest as his hand lightly pushed down the doorknob. He peeked inside, and saw a luxurious empty room filled with all manner of pictures of a little girl in Yusaka. Sheesh. The girl really loved her mama. Naruto lightly pushed the door open, making sure not to awaken Kuno, who was still peacefully sleeping in his arms. The room really was big. It could have easily been 5 times the size of his apartment. The door decided to spare them its creak this time around. When Naruto placed her on the bed, she seemed distraught for a moment after his warmth left her, so he quickly placed a blanket, softer than anything had touched before, over her form. The kitsune girl didn't seem too happy about it, but she slept anyway. He took a moment to look around the room. It truly was as exotic as the city around it. Even more so, actually, with long curtains folding from either side of the room, to the great window that gave the perfect view of Kyoto, with all the different lights shining like lanterns in the dark. It made a man feel free, not caged. He preferred it over Rias' room, which felt more like prison, rather than living place. Not to say it lacked in the luxury department. If anything, it exceeded it. But it felt cold, closed off from the rest of the world. His narrowed lightly. In the corner to the left of him there was something. A smudge of darkness laid between the shadows, silently peering at them. Naruto was never good at concealing his body language. A good way to counteract that weakness was to strike first, and strike first he did. Not even a heartbeat later, Naruto was already in front of the silent specter, his fist cocked at the back of his head. No one would ever say Naruto didn't hit hard, especially when using Sage Mode. His strike easily broke bones when hit properly. Twin golden eyes snapped open in fear, a female body tearing itself from the shadows, showing cat-like dexterity. She slid underneath his fist, attempting to sweep him off his feet with a quick strike to the back of the knee. Naruto did his father proud. Faster than the eye could see, he already launched himself over her kick, landing softly on the other side of the room. Blue glared shone with fury. An assassin? Sent after a girl barely 10 years old? He growled. Had the serpent sent her? But as he stared at her, the pieces fit together perfectly. The voluptuous figure, the golden eyes he had mistaken for orange, the long raven hair. It was the assassin from the ball. This was his chance. If he captured her, it'll be all over, considering that she was given such a high-risk operation as assassinating not only the Bael heir, but also the daughter of the Kyoto leader meant that she had more than enough information to trade in for her life. His voice was low, dangerous. She grinned as she took a loose fighting stance. The dark clothing did little hide her quite literally killer figure. Where Yasaka's shone with grace, the assassin screamed with mischief. Now, she purred, her voice making him feel something he hadn't felt in months. Pure lust. Naruto had encountered kunoichi that were prone to using their looks as their deadliest weapon, and she was no different. He always felt the itch to just go and ravish her, but he never scratched it, because he knew that a kunai to the back was soon to follow. Why didn't you tell you could fly, handsome? I wouldn't keep your interest if I told you. The woman's golden eyes almost smothered him with lust. The amount of arousal she could create just a few words was impressive, outstanding even. Thoughts of what would have happened if she wore more revealing clothing were steamy to say the least. He honestly wasn't sure if he could hold himself. I'd never lose my interest in ya. She licked her lips in satisfaction. I'd take you right here. What would ya say about that? The straw that broke the camel's back, the drop that spilled the dam, or whatever you wanted to call was all that was needed to make him risk a kunai in the back. Impossible. He knew he wasn't that easy. Sure, she was beautiful, and her purring felt like teasing in and of itself, but still. There were others who tried to seduce him long before she was even born. When the realization finally hit home, Naruto wanted to bash his head into the amethyst wall. He would have, but he didn't want to wake up Kuno. With a sudden burst of chakra, the allure was gone. The mystic aura around her had vanished as quickly as it had come in. He saw her for all she was. A hotter-than-life woman in clothing made from the shadows of the night, and the intent to probably murder him, and a child. Neko got your tongue, handsome, she said, ever so slowly walking towards him, her steps soft against the wood. She obviously didn't want to wake up her future victim. Within a moment her ample breasts were pressing themselves against his chest, her heart-shaped face mere inches away from his. The whiskered blonde smiled as a small knife revealed itself from her left sleeve. Faster than she had thought, Naruto swept her off her feet. Literally, her back hit the floor with a dull thud, her hands pinned to floor by his, their faces still inches away from each other. He leaned in, giving her a chaste kiss on the lips. Sweet, he stated. Her lips truly were delicious. If he had taken more after Jiraiya, he probably would have succumbed to her charms. Thankfully, this was one of the times being afraid of Sakura-chan surprisingly paid off big time. Wanna have another go? She said, her hot breath tickling his face. Her distraction proved fruitless. Her hands were just as useless to her as before. Maybe later, but only if you're lucky. He winked. The whiskered blonde didn't waste any more time, quickly tearing the hood right off her face. He could gasp at what he saw. There were twin fluffy ears on head. Kitsune. Was she a relative of Yusaka? If the whole leader thing was in any similar to the daimyo position, then that meant that the closest relatives had the right of succession. There's something you should know. Twin tails appeared from behind him, tying themselves around his neck, strangling with the power of a fully grown man. She used the opportunity to turn him over as fast she could. Kuno snored loudly. The woman smirked. I like being on top. She straddled his hips, lightly rubbing against his crotch. And no, I am a Nekomata. Naruto looked closer, finding his gibbet made out of two cat tails. Seeing that he had no intention of becoming purple anytime soon, the blonde used his superior strength to only lift her up, smashing her body against the purple wall. Kuno stirred in her sleep. The pain of her tails harshly meeting the walls freed him from her death clutch. He quickly wrapped his hands around her neck, growling, try anything, and well, test how many lives you have left. There was steel in his voice, making the threat seem not only more real, but also more threatening. I am all ears. Her cat ears twitched lightly. You're going to tell me everything about the serpent, got that? He applied more pressure to her throat to get the point across. After he let go, she began drinking in air with the greed of a devil. Light touched his whiskers. Wait, it was night. All the lamps were shut off, so that meant. Cocking his head to the side, his eyes met with another pair of golden eyes, but this time they were a pair full of shock and fear and rage. The Kyuubi looked none too pleased. A sudden laughter filled the room. All eyes were on the assassin. Naruto could only watch in horror as purple haze erupted from her mouth. Not a few moments later, the entire room was clouded in it. Yusaka immediately began to cough, her body falling down against door. When he himself began to cough, his horror only grew. It was poison, a lethal one. The assassin burst free from his weakened grip, bursting through the window, the pieces of glass flying in her wake. Kuna's cries were heard from the bed. She was coughing up a storm. What made his blood freeze over was the blood trickling down her lip, and the pained look on her face. He was faced with a choice. He knew he could give chase. He had breathed in only the minimal amount of poison. He's sure he could power through it, catch up to her. From what he saw, she wasn't the best hand-to-hand fighter. He could beat her and solve the entire case in doing so. On the other hand, a little girl's blood would be on his hands, the blood of being that had never been the chance to live her life. Solving the case now would be too easy. Showing remarkable speed, Naruto grabbed Kuno and dashed out of the room. To his shock, the poison had already filled the entire hallway. Yasaka's body was face first on the ground, a small puddle of blood forming beneath her mouth. Taking her on his other shoulder, he briefly debated his options. There was poison as far as his eyes could see. There was no telling how far it had spread through the building. He coughed hard, examining his hand. There was blood moving between his fingers. He looked toward the wall at the end of the hallway. There was only one way out. By the time he got there, a cerulean sphere was already in his hand. Thanks for watching.